Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Rebecca Stormwind, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years. I tell you this because what I'm about to share will sound crazy, and I need you to know I'm not the kind of person who believes in ghost stories or mountain superstitions. I have a PhD in biology. I study facts, data, evidence. At least that's what I used to do. It was October 1974 when I got assigned to investigate the livestock deaths near Cumberland Gap. The reports came from a tiny settlement called Raven's Roost, population 47, stuck in a valley so remote you needed a four-wheel drive just to reach it. My supervisor handed me the file with a shrug. "Probably wild dogs," he said. "Maybe a bear. These mountain folk get spooked easy." I should have listened to the tone in his voice. There was something he wasn't telling me. The drive took 3 hours on winding dirt roads that seemed to fold back on themselves. The deeper I went into the mountains, the quieter everything became. No bird songs, no insect buzzing. Even my radio crackled to static and died. Raven's Roost sat in the shadow of 3 peaks like a town built in a bowl. The houses were old, some dating back over a century, with hand-hewn logs and stone chimneys that looked ready to crumble. But what struck me most were the people watching from their porches. They had the strangest features, some with dark olive skin and straight black hair, others pale with blue eyes, all mixed together in ways that didn't quite make sense. These were Melungeons. I'd heard of them in college, mysterious mixed-race people whose origins nobody could quite figure out. Some said they were descendants of shipwrecked Portuguese sailors. Others claimed Cherokee and African ancestry. The truth was, nobody really knew, and the Melungeons weren't talking. I parked my truck at what passed for the town center and climbed out. The silence hit me like a physical thing. Every face on every porch turned toward me, but nobody waved or called out a greeting. They just watched with eyes that seemed too old for their faces. That's when I met Samuel Goins. He was waiting by the old community well, a man maybe 70 years old with skin like weathered leather and silver hair braided down his back. Unlike the others, he smiled when he saw me, though it wasn't entirely friendly. "You the ranger they sent about our livestock problem?" His voice carried an accent I couldn't place, musical but guarded. "Rebecca Stormwind." I extended my hand. "I understand you've had some unusual animal deaths." Samuel took my hand, and his grip was stronger than I expected. Unusual. That's one word for it. He glanced around at the watching faces, then back to me. "Best we talk somewhere private. These deaths, they're not what your government reports are going to want to hear." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. I'd investigated dozens of livestock attacks over the years. Bears, wild dogs, the occasional mountain lion. But the way Samuel spoke, the way everyone watched us with those careful eyes, this felt different. "Show me," I said. We walked to the edge of town where the Collins family kept their cattle. The pasture was empty now, except for fence posts and morning mist. But Samuel led me to a spot near the tree line where the grass was stained dark. "This is where we found Bessie 2 weeks ago," he said. "Best milk cow the Collins ever had." I knelt down and examined the stain. Even after 2 weeks and several rainstorms, the patch was clearly visible. Too dark, too large for a normal predator kill. "What exactly did you find?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Cow was drained dry, Miss Stormwind. Not a drop of blood left in her. 2 neat holes in her neck, like some and used a straw." I looked up at him sharply. "That's impossible. No predator feeds that way." "No natural predator," Samuel agreed. "But there's things in these mountains that ain't natural. Things our people have been dealing with for a very long time." The way he said it made the hair on my arms stand up. I was a scientist. I believed in facts, evidence, logical explanations. But standing in that empty pasture with the old man's words hanging in the air, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood. The certainty that I was being watched by something I couldn't see. "Mr. Goins," I said, standing and brushing off my knees, "I'll need to examine the carcass and interview witnesses. This is probably some kind of disease or maybe a very unusual predator, but there's got to be a rational explanation." Samuel nodded, but his expression said he knew better. "I'll help you however I can, Miss Stormwind, but I should warn you, this problem's been going on for longer than you might think, and it's about to get a whole lot worse." As we walked back toward town, I caught glimpses of faces in windows, shadows moving between buildings. The Melungeons were watching, waiting to see what the outside world would make of their secret. I had no idea I was walking into a nightmare that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the world. The next morning brought the second death. I was staying at the Goins boarding house, the only place in Raven's Roost that took outsiders, when Samuel woke me before dawn. His face was grim in the lamplight. "It happened again," he said simply. We walked through the pre-dawn darkness to the Mullins farm on the other side of the settlement. A small crowd had already gathered, speaking in hushed voices that stopped when they saw me coming. They parted reluctantly, letting me through to see what lay in the middle of their circle. It was a sheep, a ewe that had probably been beautiful the day before. Now she lay on her side, her wool stained with morning dew, but not a drop of blood. Her eyes were open, staring at No, oathing, and her mouth hung slack. But it was her neck that made my breath catch. 2 perfect puncture wounds, each about the diameter of a pencil, placed with surgical precision on either side of her throat. The skin around them was pale white, almost translucent, as if every drop of blood had been drawn out through those tiny holes. I pulled out my magnifying glass and examined the wounds more closely. The edges were clean, almost cauterized. No tearing, no ragged flesh. Whatever had made these marks had done so with incredible precision. "When did this happen?" I asked. "Sometime after midnight," said Jonas Mullins, the sheep's owner. He was a big man with hands like ham hocks, but his voice shook when he spoke. "I heard something moving around out here, but when I looked out the window, I couldn't see nothing. This morning, I found her like this." "Did you hear any sounds? Growling, barking, anything like that?" Jonas shook his head. "That's the strange part. It was dead quiet. Quieter than it should have been. Even the crickets stopped chirping." I spent the next hour taking photographs and measurements, collecting samples of soil and what little fluid remained around the wounds. Everything I did felt inadequate. This wasn't like any predator attack I'd ever seen. "Mr. Goins," I said as the crowd began to disperse, "I need to speak with you privately." We walked to his house, a sturdy log cabin with a wide front porch. Inside, the walls were covered with old photographs, generations of Melungeon families with their distinctive mixed features. Samuel poured us both coffee and sat across from me at his kitchen table. "You've seen this before," I said. It wasn't a question. Samuel nodded slowly. "Every 13 days for the past month. Always during the new moon. Always the same. Animal drained completely dry. 2 wounds in the neck. That's impossible from a biological standpoint. No creature feeds that way. I told you yesterday, Miss Stormwind, this ain't a natural creature we're dealing with." I set down my coffee cup harder than I meant to. "Mr. Goins, I respect your beliefs, but there has to be a scientific explanation. Maybe some kind of disease that causes the blood to coagulate and drain internally, or a predator we haven't identified yet." Samuel's dark eyes studied me for a long moment. Then he got up and walked to an old wooden chest in the corner of the room. He returned with a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. "This belonged to my great-great-grandfather," he said, opening it carefully. "He wrote down the old stories, the things our people passed down through the generations. The handwriting was faded but legible, written in a mix of English and what looked like Cherokee symbols." Samuel found the page he was looking for and turned the journal toward me. "Read this," he said. The entry was dated 1834. "The curse has awakened again. Mary Goins, taken with the sickness, cannot bear sunlight, craves raw meat, speaks in the old tongue. The Cherokees say it will last until the blood debt is paid. God help us all. My hands were shaking as I read. This is just folklore, Mr. Goins. Family legends passed down through generations. Is it? Samuel's voice was quiet but firm. Because Mary Collins, Jonas Mullen's niece, has been having the same symptoms described in that journal. Light sensitivity, craving for raw meat. And yesterday morning, her aunt found her speaking Cherokee in her sleep, a language she never learned. The coffee in my stomach turned to ice. Where's Mary now? Her family's watching her, keeping her inside during the dangerous times. Samuel closed the journal. But it's getting worse, Miss Stormwind, and tomorrow night is the new moon again. I left Samuel's house with my head spinning. Everything in my scientific training told me this was nonsense, superstition and coincidence wrapped up in mountain folklore. But I couldn't ignore the evidence of my own eyes. So puncture wounds were real. The drained animals were real. That afternoon I drove to the nearest town with phone service and called my supervisor. I tried to explain what I'd found, but even to my own ears it sounded crazy. Just file your report, Stormwind, he said. Probably wild dogs or something. Don't get caught up in local ghost stories. But as I drove back to Raven's Roost that evening, I knew it wasn't wild dogs. Whatever was killing these animals was something I'd never encountered before. And if Samuel was right about the 13-day cycle, we had less than 24 hours before it happened again. The sun was setting behind the mountains when I reached the settlement. The streets were empty except for Samuel, who was waiting by my truck. Miss Stormwind, he said urgently, you need to come with me. Mary Collins is asking for you. Asking for me? She doesn't even know me. Samuel's expression was grim. She knows more than she should. And what she's saying, it ain't Mary talking anymore. The Collins house sat at the edge of Raven's Roost, a 2-story frame building with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch. Light flickered in the upstairs windows. Oil lamps, I realized. They'd removed all the electric bulbs. Samuel and I were met at the door by an older woman with worry lines etched deep around her eyes. I'm Rose Collins, Mary's aunt, she said. Thank you for coming, Miss Stormwind. We don't know what else to do. She led us through a house that felt like a tomb. Heavy curtains blocked every window. The few lamps that were lit had been turned down low, casting long shadows on the walls. From somewhere upstairs came a sound that made my skin crawl, a low, rhythmic humming in a minor key. How long has she been like this? I asked. 3 days now, Rose replied. Started right after the first sheep died. She can't tolerate any bright light. Burns her skin like acid. And the things she says... Rose shuddered. Things she couldn't possibly know. We climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor. The humming grew louder, and I could make out words in a language I didn't recognize. At the end of the hall, a door stood slightly ajar, with warm lamplight spilling through the crack. Mary? Rose called softly. The ranger lady is here to see you. The humming stopped abruptly. For a moment the house was dead silent. Then a voice answered. Young, female, but with an odd cadence that raised the hair on my neck. Send her in. I've been waiting. Rose pushed the door open, and I got my first look at Mary Collins. She couldn't have been more than 22, with the typical Melungeon features, olive skin, dark hair, high cheekbones. But something was terribly wrong. Her skin had a waxy, translucent quality that made the veins underneath clearly visible. Her fingernails had grown long and yellowed, more like claws than human nails. And her eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils. The entire eye, from edge to edge, was the color of midnight. Hello, Rebecca, she said, and her voice carried an accent I'd never heard before. Ancient. Foreign. I know why you're here. My mouth went dry. How do you know my name? Mary smiled, revealing teeth that looked too sharp, too pointed. I know many things now. Things whispered in the wind, things written in the blood of the earth. You want to understand what's happening here, don't you? Despite every instinct screaming at me to run, I stepped into the room. Mary, I'm here to help. Can you tell me how you're feeling? She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Mary is sleeping deep inside. I am something else now, something older. Her black eyes fixed on mine. Do you know the history of this place, Rebecca? Do you know what your people did to mine? I don't understand. 200 years ago, the Cherokee trusted the Melungeons. We were brothers, sisters, family. But when the white soldiers came looking for Chero, key villages to destroy, some Melungeons showed them the way, betrayed their own blood for promises of safety. Samuel stepped forward. Mary, you need to fight this. This isn't you talking. Those black eyes turned to him, and Mary's lips curled in a smile that was pure malice. Hello, Samuel. Yes, it's me. The granddaughter of the shaman your ancestor betrayed. I've been waiting so long for my revenge. The temperature in the room dropped at least 10 degrees. Frost began forming on the windows despite the October warmth outside. Mary rose from her chair with movements that were too fluid, too graceful for a human being. Every generation, one of your bloodline must pay for the betrayal, she continued. One must become what I became, a creature of thirst and hunger, doomed to drain the life from everything they touch. I watched in horror as Mary's fingernails extended another inch, becoming true claws. Her skin grew even more translucent, and I could see her heart beating through her chest. But it was beating too slow, maybe once every 5 seconds. The animals are just the beginning, Mary said. Soon I'll need something more substantial. That's when Rose Collins screamed. We turned to see her backing against the wall, pointing at Mary with a shaking hand. Mary was floating 3 feet off the ground, her nightgown billowing around her as if moved by an unfelt wind. The black eyes were now glowing with a faint red light. The hunger is growing, Mary said, her voice now coming from everywhere at once, the walls, the ceiling, inside my own head. And tomorrow night, when the moon is dark, I'll be strong enough to feed properly. Samuel grabbed my arm. We need to leave, now. But as we turned toward the door, it slammed shut with a bang that shook the entire house. Mary laughed again, that horrible glass-breaking sound, and suddenly, every window in the room exploded outward in a shower of sparkling fragments. You can run, Rebecca, her voice echoed as we fled down the stairs. But you can't hide from what's coming. Tomorrow night, someone in Raven's Roost is going to die, and it might be you. We burst out of the house and into the night air, both of us breathing hard. Behind us, every light in the Collins house went out at once, plunging it into complete darkness. Dear God, Rose Collins whispered, stumbling out behind us. What's happened to my Mary? Samuel put his arm around the older woman's shoulders. The curse has taken her, Rose, just like it took others before her. I was shaking, my scientific mind struggling to process what I'd just witnessed. This is impossible. People don't float in the air. Eyes don't turn black. There has to be an explanation. There is an explanation, Samuel said grimly. One you're not going to like. As we walked back toward the center of town, I noticed that every house we passed was dark, every door tightly closed. The Melungeons of Raven's Roost were hiding, waiting for tomorrow night to pass. But I had the terrible feeling that hiding wouldn't be enough this time. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mary Collins floating in the air, her black eyes glowing red, her voice promising death. By morning, I'd made a decision. Scientific training or not, I couldn't ignore what I'd witnessed. Something was happening in Raven's Roost that defied everything I thought I knew about the world. And if Mary was right about tonight being worse, people were going to die. I found Samuel at the community well, drawing water for his morning coffee. His face looked older than it had the day before, carved with new lines of worry. We need to talk, I said, about the curse, about what really happened 200 years ago. Samuel nodded as if he'd been expecting this. Come on, there's something I need to show you. He led me out of town and up a winding mountain path I hadn't noticed before. The trail was old, worn smooth by centuries of feet, and it climbed steadily through pine and oak forest toward the ridgeline. After an hour of hiking, we reached a clearing where the trees gave way to bare rock. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of standing stones, each about 6 feet tall and covered with symbols I didn't recognize. Cherokee Sacred Site, Samuel explained. This is where it all started. He walked to the center of the circle and sat cross-legged on the ground. I followed, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on this place. My great-great-grandfather, Jonas Goins, was part of a Melungeon family that had lived alongside the Cherokee for generations, Samuel began. They were traders, go-betweens, trusted by both peoples. He pulled out the old journal again and turned to a page near the beginning. But when the government started forcing Cherokee removals, some Melungeons got scared. They thought if they helped the soldiers find Cherokee villages, they'd be left alone. The Trail of Tears, I said. That's right. Jonas Goins led soldiers to a Cherokee winter camp hidden in a valley about 10 miles from here. 43 people died in the attack, including women and children. Samuel's voice was heavy with shame that had been carried through generations. The Cherokee shaman who survived the attack was a woman named Aita Ridge. She was dying, but she had enough strength left for one last piece of magic. He read from the journal. She cursed the Goins bloodline, said that every generation, when the betrayal was strongest in our hearts, one of us would become what she was becoming, a creature that feeds on blood, that knows only hunger and rage, a reminder of what we had done. The pieces were starting to fit together in my mind, though I wished they weren't. Mary Collins is related to your family? Second cousin. The curse doesn't just affect direct descendants. It spreads through all the bloodlines that were present that day. A chill wind swept through the clearing, making the pine trees whisper. But why now? Why is it happening again? Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Because every 37 years, when the astronomical conditions are right, the spiritual boundary weakens. The curse has more power. And this time, he looked up at me with eyes full of fear. This time, it's stronger than it's ever been. There has to be a way to stop it. There is. Aita Ridge left instructions in the spirit world, a way to break the curse permanently. Samuel stood and walked to one of the standing stones. But it requires a member of the original betrayer bloodline to willingly enter the spirit realm and face the judgment of the Cherokee ancestors. And if they're found guilty, they die. But their death breaks the curse for all future generations. I stared at him. You're talking about human sacrifice. I'm talking about justice, about paying a debt that's been owed for 200 years. Samuel's jaw was set with determination. I'm the eldest of the Goins line, Rebecca. It's my responsibility. Before I could respond, a scream echoed across the mountains, high, terrified, and clearly human. We looked at each other for one frozen moment, then ran. The scream had come from the direction of town. We crashed through the forest, branches tearing at our clothes, rocks rolling under our feet. By the time we reached Raven's Roost, a crowd had gathered around the Mullins house. Jonas Mullins was dead. I pushed through the crowd and knelt beside the body. He was lying in his front yard, his face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. And there, on his neck, were 2 perfect puncture wounds. Happened about an hour ago, Rose Collins said, her voice shaking. He was feeding his chickens when we heard him scream. By the time we got here, he was like this. But it's still daylight, I protested. You said Mary can't tolerate sunlight. The curse is getting stronger, Samuel replied grimly. She's adapting, and tonight and the moon is dark. She'll be unstoppable. As if summoned by his words, a figure appeared at the edge of the crowd. Mary Collins walked toward us with slow, predatory steps. But this wasn't the sick young woman I'd seen the night before. This creature was something else entirely. Her skin was now paper white and seemed to glow with its own light. Her black hair floated around her head as if she were underwater. The black eyes held depths that seemed to go on forever, and when she smiled, her teeth were like razor blades. "Hello, Samuel," she said, her voice carrying impossible harmonics. "Are you ready to pay what you owe?" The crowd scattered, people running for their houses and slamming doors behind them. Only Samuel and I remained in the street with the thing that had once been Mary Collins. "I know what you are," Samuel said, standing straighter. "And I know what you want." "Do you?" Mary tilted her head with bird-like curiosity. "I want blood, Samuel. I want the life that was stolen from my people. And I want it tonight." "Then take mine," Samuel said simply. "I'm offering myself in place of the others." Mary laughed, and the sound shattered every window on the street. "Oh, Samuel, it doesn't work that way. The curse isn't satisfied by suicide. You have to face judgment in the proper way, in the proper place." She gestured toward the mountain where we'd just come from. "The sacred circle, when the moon is dark. And you have to bring the Cherokee blood with you, someone who can open the spirit paths." Samuel looked at me desperately. "There's a Cherokee elder named Joseph Ridge who lives on the reservation about 100 miles from here. He's the last person who knows the old rituals." "Then you'd better hurry," Mary said, her form already beginning to fade in the afternoon sunlight. "Because when the sun sets tonight, I'm going to feed on everyone in this town. I'm starting with you, Rebecca." She vanished like smoke, leaving only the smell of old blood and the echo of that terrible laugh. Samuel grabbed my arm. "We have to go. Now. If we drive hard, we can reach Joseph and get back before dark." As we ran toward my truck, I realized I was no longer questioning the supernatural. I was accepting it, embracing it, because the alternative was watching everyone in Raven's Roost die. The real horror wasn't just that monsters existed. It was that sometimes human sacrifice was the only solution. Joseph Ridge was 93 years old and blind, but his hands were steady as he prepared the ritual components. We'd found him at the Cherokee reservation just as the sun was starting to set, and somehow he'd been expecting us. "Aida Ridge was my great-grandmother," he explained as we raced back toward Raven's Roost. "She told me this day would come, when the spiritual debt would finally be paid." The old Cherokee man sat in the back of my truck with a leather bag full of herbs, stones, and other items I couldn't identify. Samuel drove while I watched the darkness gather between the mountains. "Will it work?" I asked Joseph. "If Samuel's heart is truly repentant, if he's willing to accept whatever judgment the ancestors deliver, then yes. The curse will be broken." Joseph's sightless eyes turned toward me. "But understand, Rebecca, there's no guarantee he'll survive the spiritual trial." We reached Raven's Roost just as the last light faded from the sky. The town was dead silent, every house dark and shuttered. But I could feel something moving in the shadows between buildings, something that watched us with hungry black eyes. The hike up to the sacred circle took 45 minutes, our way lit only by flashlight and the Cherokee elders' sure knowledge of the ancient path. When we reached the clearing, the standing stones seemed to glow with their own faint light. "She's already here," Joseph said quietly. He was right. Mary Collins stood at the center of the stone circle, but she was no longer even remotely human. Her skin was translucent white, stretched tight over bones that were too long and joints that bent in impossible directions. Her eyes were like black holes in her face, and when she smiled, I counted at least 30 teeth, all sharp as needles. "Welcome," she said, her voice now a harmony of dozens of voices speaking in unison. "Are you ready to face judgment, Samuel Goins?" Joseph began setting up his ritual components around the circle, herbs that he burned in small clay bowls, stones arranged in patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. As he worked, he chanted in Cherokee, his ancient voice carrying power that made the air itself vibrate. "Samuel," Joseph said, "you must enter the spirit realm willingly. Once you're there, you'll face the ancestors of those who died because of your family's betrayal. They will judge your heart and decide whether the debt has been paid." Samuel nodded and walked to the center of the circle. As he sat cross-legged on the ground, Mary's form began to shimmer and change, becoming less solid, more like a shadow with substance. "If they find you guilty," she whispered, circling him like a predator, "you'll die, and your death will feed me for centuries." "I accept their judgment," Samuel said firmly, "whatever it is." Joseph's chanting reached a crescendo, and suddenly the world around us changed. The standing stones began to glow brighter, and I could see through them into another realm, a place where Cherokee ancestors stood in a great council, their faces painted for war, their eyes holding the wisdom of ages. Samuel's body went rigid as his spirit was pulled into that other realm. I watched in fascination and terror as his spiritual self stood before the ancestral council while his physical form remained motionless in our world. The trial lasted hours, though time seemed to move differently in the sacred circle. I saw Samuel's spirit relive the betrayal, saw him experience the fear and pain of every Cherokee who had died because of his ancestors' actions. The ancestors spoke in voices like thunder, questioning him, testing his remorse, weighing his willingness to sacrifice himself for justice. Mary's shadow form grew more agitated as the trial continued. She had expected quick judgment, swift death that would feed her hunger, but the ancestors were being thorough. Finally, just as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, the spiritual trial reached its conclusion. The Cherokee ancestors conferred among themselves, their voices like wind through ancient trees. Then one of them, an elderly woman with silver hair and eyes like stars, stepped forward and spoke directly to Samuel's spirit. "Jonas Goins betrayed our trust and caused the deaths of our people," she said, her voice carrying across both realms. "This betrayal has cursed both our peoples for generations. But you, Samuel Goins, have shown true repentance. You offer your life freely to balance the scales of justice." Samuel's spirit bowed deeply. "I do." "Then hear our judgment," the ancestral woman continued. "Your life will be the price for breaking this curse, but your death will not feed the darkness. Instead, your sacrifice will free both the cursed spirit and your people from this burden." Mary's form let out a shriek that shattered the morning silence. "No, I need his death. I need his blood." But the ancestors had spoken. Samuel's spirit began to glow with a pure white light, and that light spread outward, surrounding Mary's shadow form. As it touched her, she began to change again, not becoming more monstrous, but returning to human form. "I remember," she whispered, her voice now purely Mary Collins again. "I remember who I was." The Cherokee woman spoke once more. "Aida Ridge, daughter of our people, your anger has been justified, but your purpose is now complete. The debt is paid. You may find peace." Mary's form continued to brighten until she became pure light, and in that light, I saw not the creature she'd become, but the Cherokee shaman she'd once been, proud, wise, and finally at peace. She looked at Samuel with eyes full of forgiveness. "Thank you," she said. And then she was gone, not destroyed, but freed, rising into the dawn sky like a bird returning home. Samuel's physical body collapsed in the center of the circle. I rushed to him, but Joseph placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "He's not dead," the old man said, "but he's paid the price. The curse is broken." Samuel's eyes opened, and I saw that they held a peace I'd never seen before. He was weak, aged by the spiritual trial, but alive. "It's over," he whispered. "Finally, it's over." We helped him down the mountain as the sun rose over Raven's Roost. The town was stirring to life, people emerging from their houses for the first time in days. They could feel it too. The oppressive weight that had hung over the valley for generations was gone. I filed my official report the next week, describing the deaths as the result of an unknown predator that had apparently moved on. My supervisor was satisfied with that explanation. He didn't need to know about curses and spirits and the price of ancestral guilt. but I knew. And I stayed in touch with the people of Raven's Roost, watching over them, making sure the curse really was broken. Samuel lived another 20 years, becoming the keeper of the true story, the one who made sure future generations understood both the cost of betrayal and the power of redemption. The Melungeons opened their community to the outside world for the first time in centuries. They shared their history, their culture, their mysterious heritage, and slowly, the fear and suspicion that had isolated them began to fade. As for me, I learned that the world is far stranger and more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. Joseph Ridge warned me that there were other curses, other supernatural threats hidden throughout the Appalachian Mountains. Some nights, when the wind is right and the moon is dark, I still feel them out there. Ancient angers waiting to be awakened, old debts waiting to be paid. But I also learned that sometimes when people are willing to face the truth about their past and make real sacrifices for justice, even the darkest curses can be broken. Samuel Goins died peacefully in 1994, surrounded by family and friends who knew him as a hero. At his funeral, a Cherokee delegation came to honor the man who had helped heal a wound that had festered for 2 centuries. And in Raven's Roost, they still tell the story of the Melungeon curse, not as a ghost story to frighten children, but as a reminder that every action has consequences, and that sometimes the only way to heal the past is to be willing to sacrifice for the future. I know because I was there. I saw it happen. And I'll never forget the lesson Samuel Goins taught me in that sacred circle among the standing stones. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what's right even when you're terrified, even when it might cost you everything. My name is Elizabeth Moonhunter, and I need to tell you what really happened in the Cherokee National Forest back in 1988. The official reports say it was just an aggressive cougar that got put down by wildlife control. That's a lie. What I saw out there, what I had to do, it still keeps me awake some nights. I was 32 then, been a park ranger for 10 years. My job was wildlife research, tracking endangered species mostly. Black bears, wildcats, anything the government wanted counted and studied. I had a good reputation for getting results where other rangers failed. Maybe it was my Cherokee blood. My grandmother always said I had a gift for reading the forest. The Cherokee National Forest covers over 650,000 acres of Tennessee wilderness. Most folks stick to the marked trails, snap their photos, and head home. But there are places deep in those woods where no trails go. Places where the trees grow so thick you need a compass to find your way out. That's where I spent most of my time. My daughter Sarah was 8 then, living with my mother in town during the school year. Being a single mom and a ranger wasn't easy, but the work mattered to me. Every species we saved, every habitat we protected, it felt like honoring something important. Something older than the government paperwork. The trouble started in late September. Hikers had been reporting strange animal sounds from the deep woods, not normal bear calls or cougar screams. Something else. Something that made their skin crawl even when they couldn't explain why. Then came the equipment problems. Research cameras I'd placed along game trails kept getting destroyed. Not knocked over by bears or damaged by weather, torn apart. Pieces scattered like something had gone crazy on them. Each camera cost the Park Service $800. My supervisor wasn't happy. Probably just vandals, he said. Kids from Taos and looking for trouble. But I knew better. Kids didn't hike 15 miles into unmarked wilderness to smash cameras. And they sure didn't leave tracks like the ones I was finding. The morning I found Tom Bradley changed everything. Tom was a regular, 50-something accountant from Knoxville who came hiking every few weekends. Good hiker, followed the rules, never caused problems. His wife called the ranger station when he didn't come home Sunday night. We started searching at dawn. I found pieces of him scattered across half a mile of forest floor. I've seen bear attacks. I've seen what happens when hikers surprise a protective mother or stumble between a predator and its kill. This wasn't that. Bears don't arrange body parts in patterns. They don't leave some pieces completely untouched while shredding others to ribbons, and they sure don't leave tracks like what I found near Tom's remains. The paw prints were huge, twice the size of any cougar I'd ever tracked, but it was the details that made my stomach turn. Normal cat paws have 4 toes and retractable claws. These prints showed something impossible, an opposable thumb, like human hands, but with claws longer than my fingers. I took photos, made plaster casts, documented everything. Then I did something that probably saved my life. I called my grandmother's friend, Mary Ridge. Mary was old Cherokee, one of the few people left who remembered the real stories. Not the tourist versions you hear at the gift shops, but the warnings passed down through generations. Stories about things that lived in the deep woods, things that protected sacred places from people who didn't belong. "You found something that isn't supposed to exist," Mary said when I described the tracks. Her voice got quiet. "But it does exist. It always has." She told me to meet her that evening. Said there were things I needed to know about my family's history. Things about why I could walk in the deep woods without fear, when other people got lost or turned around. As I drove home that night, I kept thinking about Tom Bradley's face, what was left of it anyway. His eyes were gone, but his expression, it looked surprised, like he'd seen something impossible right before he died. I had no idea that I was about to see it too. Mary Ridge lived in a small house on the Cherokee Reservation, about an hour's drive from the forest. The walls were covered with old photographs and traditional Cherokee artwork. She made coffee and sat me down at her kitchen table like we were going to discuss the weather. "Your grandmother ever tell you about the Wampus cat?" she asked. I nodded. "Just stories. Cherokee legend about a woman who got cursed for spying on men's ceremonies." "Not legend. History." Mary's eyes were serious. "The woman's name was Atsila. She was curious, maybe too curious. The men were performing sacred rituals to ask the spirits for protection during hunting season. Women weren't allowed to watch." She poured more coffee, her hands steady despite her age. "Atsila hid in the woods and watched anyway. When the medicine man discovered her, the spirits were angry. They changed her into something that could guard sacred places forever. Part woman, part wildcat. 6 legs for speed, human intelligence for hunting, and a hunger that's never satisfied. Mary, I appreciate the stories, but that thing that killed the hiker, it's been sleeping for 60 years. Something woke it up." I set down my coffee cup. "What do you mean, something woke it up?" "There's a university team working in the forest, archaeologists. They've been digging up Cherokee burial sites and ceremonial grounds, taking things that should never be moved." My blood went cold. I'd heard about the dig. Dr. Peterson from UT had the proper permits. But permits from the government don't mean much to something that's older than governments. "The Wampus cat protects sacred places," Mary continued. "It kills anyone who disturbs them. But there's something you need to know about your family, Elizabeth. Your great-great-grandmother was Atsila's sister." I stared at her. "That's impossible." "Cherokee blood recognizes Cherokee blood. The Wampus cat won't hurt you unless you betray the sacred trust. But it will use you. It will expect you to help." I drove back to my cabin that night with my mind spinning. Part of me wanted to dismiss everything Mary had said as superstition. But the rational part, the park ranger who'd studied animal behavior for 10 years, kept thinking about those impossible tracks. The next morning, I got the call about Karen Walsh. Karen was a graduate student working on Dr. Peterson's archaeological team. 23 years old, blonde, studying for her master's in anthropology. Her tent was found shredded at the dig site campground. She was found 50 yards away. Like Tom Bradley, she'd been torn apart and arranged in a pattern. But this pattern I recognized from my grandmother's stories. 5 points, like a star. Sacred Cherokee geometry. Dr. Peterson was waiting for me when I arrived at the scene. He was a thin man in his 50s, wearing clean hiking clothes that looked like they'd never seen real wilderness. "This is obviously the same animal that killed the hiker," he said. "We need armed escorts for the rest of the dig. I knelt down next to Karen's remains, studying the wounds. Dr. Peterson, what exactly are you digging up out here? Cherokee ceremonial site, probably 300 years old. We found pottery, tools, some very interesting carved stones. Where are these items now? University storage facility. Why? I looked at the claw marks on a nearby tree. They were 8 feet off the ground. You might want to consider returning them. That's not how archaeology works, Ranger Moonhunter. These artifacts belong in a museum where people can study them. That's when I heard it. A sound. It like nothing I'd ever experienced. Part cougar scream, part human wail, part something else entirely. It came from the ridge above us, echoing through the trees like a warning. Dr. Peterson went white. What was that? That, I said, standing up and brushing dirt off my knees, was something telling you to give back what you stole. But he wasn't listening. He was staring at the ridge line where something large and impossible was moving between the trees. I followed his gaze and saw it clearly for the first time. The wampus cat was real. It stood on its hind legs like a person, but it was easily 7 feet tall. Its body was massive, covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb light. 6 legs, just like Mary had said. And eyes. Yellow eyes that glowed with an intelligence that was definitely not animal. It watched us for maybe 10 seconds. Then it dropped to all 6 legs and disappeared into the forest so fast it seemed like it had never been there at all. Dr. Peterson was shaking. What was that thing? I looked at him, then at Karen Walsh's arranged remains, then back at the ridge where something ancient and angry was waiting for justice. That, I said, was your problem. The next 3 days were a nightmare. Dr. Peterson refused to stop the dig. He called in security guards from a private company, ex-military guys with rifles and attitude. They set up a perimeter around the archaeological site and acted like they were protecting gold instead of old Cherokee pottery. I tried to convince my supervisor to shut down that section of forest, but he wouldn't listen. The university had permits. The guards were licensed. Everything was legal on paper. The wampus cat didn't care about paperwork. The first guard disappeared on Tuesday night. Marcus Webb, 35, former Marine. His rifle was found in 3 pieces, scattered across 100 yards. Marcus himself was never found. Just blood on the trees and claw marks that went deeper into solid oak than any normal animal could make. The remaining guards got nervous. They started shooting at shadows, jumping at every sound. Dr. Peterson brought in floodlights and generators, trying to turn the wilderness into a construction site. That's when I realized the creature was playing with them. I found evidence everywhere, tracks circling their camp at night, scratch marks on their equipment. Things moved from where they'd been left. The wampus cat was studying them, learning their routines, their weaknesses. It was hunting them like prey. Wednesday morning brought another death. David Chen, the team photographer. He'd gone to document some petroglyphs on a rock face about a quarter-mile from camp. We found his camera first, lens shattered, memory card missing. Then we found David. This time the arrangement was different, more complex. The body parts formed a circle around a natural depression in the ground, a place where Cherokee people had probably held ceremonies for centuries. Dr. Peterson finally started to crack. "It's targeting my team specifically," he said, pacing around his trailer. "Some kind of trained animal. Maybe escaped from a circus or private zoo." I didn't bother arguing anymore. I had work to do. That night, I hiked deep into the forest alone. No radio, no backup, no weapons except a flashlight and a pouch of tobacco my grandmother had given me years ago. I needed to find the wampus cat before it killed anyone else. I found it waiting for me in a clearing about 2 miles from the dig site. It sat on its haunches like a giant house cat, all 6 legs folded beneath its massive body. In the moonlight, I could see details that photographs would never capture. The fur wasn't solid black. It had streaks of brown and gray, like a normal wildcat, but wrong somehow. Too long, too thick, moving in wind that wasn't there. Its face was the worst part. Definitely feline with a broad nose and prominent fangs. But the bone structure underneath was wrong. Too human. The eyes especially. They looked at me with an intelligence that was ancient and female and completely furious. We stared at each other for a long time. I could hear my heart beating, could smell my own fear sweat mixing with the pine and earth scents of the forest. This thing could tear me apart in seconds. I knew that, it knew that, but it didn't move. Finally, I spoke in Cherokee. The words came from somewhere deep in my memory, phrases my grandmother had taught me when I was Sarah's age. Skihi, Atsila, Nvi Cherokee. Hello, Atsila, I am Cherokee. The creature's ears twitched. Its head tilted slightly like it was listening to something I couldn't hear. Then it stood up. On its hind legs, the wampus cat was enormous. 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its front forelegs hung at its sides like arms, ending in paws that looked too much like hands. The claws were ivory white and curved, designed for tearing and holding. It took one step toward me, then another. I held my ground, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. The tobacco pouch felt warm in my hand. The creature stopped just outside arm's reach. Its yellow eyes studied my face like it was reading something written there. Then, impossibly, it spoke. Not with words. The mouth wasn't shaped for human speech. But I heard a voice in my head, clear as if someone was standing next to me. The sacred places are violated. The dead are disturbed. Justice must be served. I know, I whispered. I can help you get back what was stolen. You carry the old blood. You understand the old ways, but understanding is not enough. Action is required. The voice in my head was getting stronger, clearer. I could feel something changing in my perception. The forest looked brighter. Sounds were sharper, smells more distinct. The diggers must return what they have taken. If they refuse, they will join their ancestors in death. Give me time, I said. Let me try to convince them. The wampus cat stared at me for another long moment. Then it dropped back to all 6 legs and melted into the forest like smoke. I stood alone in the clearing, shaking with adrenaline and something else, something that felt like awakening. When I got back to my truck, I found scratch marks on the hood. 5 parallel lines, perfectly spaced. They weren't there when I'd parked. The creature had been testing me too. Thursday morning, Dr. Peterson's team was down to 3 people: himself, his research assistant Janet Morris, and 1 remaining security guard named Pike. They were packing equipment, finally ready to abandon the dig, but they weren't planning to return the artifacts. The university has invested too much in this project, Peterson told me. These items need to be properly cataloged and studied. We can't just bury them again because of local superstitions. I tried one more time. Dr. Peterson, 3 people are dead. Whatever's out there, it's connected to what you took from this site. Just give it back. I'm a scientist, Ranger Moonhunter. I don't make decisions based on folklore. That's when Janet Morris spoke up. She was young, maybe 25, with the kind of earnest face that belonged in a classroom, not a war zone. Dr. Peterson, I've been thinking about the body arrangements. They're not random. They match Cherokee ceremonial patterns I've seen in my research. Peterson glared at her. You're letting fear cloud your judgment. No, she said quietly. I think I'm finally seeing clearly. That afternoon, while Peterson and Pike loaded the last of their equipment, Janet Morris came to find me. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. The artifacts are in Peterson's trailer, she whispered. Locked metal case. I have the combination. Why are you telling me this? Because Karen was my roommate. We grew up together. And because I've been having dreams. She touched her temple. Dreams about a woman in the forest. She's angry, but not at me. She's angry, at people who take without permission. That night, I made my decision. The security guard was asleep in his chair, rifle across his lap. Dr. Peterson was in his trailer, probably writing, reports that would blame everything on local wildlife management issues. The camp was quiet except for the hum of generators. Janet met me by Peterson's trailer. Her hands were shaking as she worked the combination lock. "The case is heavy," she warned. "Must be 30 pounds of pottery and carved stones." Inside the case, wrapped in foam padding, were pieces of Cherokee history that hadn't seen daylight for 3 centuries. Pottery bowls with intricate geometric patterns, carved stone pipes, a medicine bundle wrapped in what looked like deer hide. The moment I touched the medicine bundle, the world changed. Visions flooded my mind. Cherokee people gathered in the clearing where David Chen had died, performing ceremonies under starlight. Generations of sacred rituals, births and deaths and seasons changing. The forest itself participating in something larger than human understanding. And through it all, a presence watching from the trees. Atsila, transformed but still Cherokee, still protecting what was sacred. "I can feel them," Janet whispered. "The spirits. They're angry but also hopeful." We carried the case to my truck and drove to the ceremonial site. The forest felt different now, more alive, more aware. Animals watched us from the shadows, but they weren't afraid. They were curious. The wampus cat was waiting in the clearing. It sat perfectly still as we approached, yellow eyes reflecting our flashlight beams. Janet gasped when she saw it clearly, but she didn't run. Maybe the visions had prepared her, or maybe she was braver than she looked. I opened the case and began placing the artifacts back where they belonged. The pottery in the natural depression where David had died. The carved stones around the edges of the clearing in patterns I somehow remembered. The medicine bundle in the center, where moonlight fell through the trees. As I worked, I could feel the forest responding. The air grew warmer. Sounds became clearer. Owl calls, wind in the leaves. Something like distant singing. Janet was crying, but not from fear, from relief. When the last artifact was in place, the wampus cat stood and walked toward us. Up close, I could see the human features more clearly. The bone structure beneath the fur, the intelligence in those yellow eyes, the way it moved with purpose instead of instinct. This wasn't an animal. This was a person, transformed by forces older than civilization. The creature reached out with one massive paw and touched my forehead. The contact was like lightning. Every Cherokee story my grandmother had ever told me flooded back in perfect detail. Every sacred place in the forest revealed itself to my memory. Every plant and animal and stone that was connected to the old ways became part of my awareness. I understood. The curse wasn't just punishment. It was responsibility. Atsila had been chosen to guard sacred places forever, but she was tired, had been alone too long. She needed help. She needed someone with Cherokee blood who could bridge the old world and the new. "You carry the gift," her voice said in my mind. "You can feel the sacred places, protect them from those who would harm them. Will you accept this burden?" I thought about my daughter Sarah, about the world she would inherit. I thought about developers who wanted to build shopping malls on Cherokee burial grounds, about tourists who carved their names in sacred trees, about people like Dr. Peterson who took without permission and called it science. "Yes," I said. The transformation wasn't painful. It was like waking up from a long sleep. My senses sharpened until I could hear individual heartbeats, smell emotions, see heat signatures in the darkness. I was still human, but more than human, connected to the forest in ways that would take years to fully understand. The wampus cat, Atsila, stepped back and nodded once. Then she turned and walked into the trees, her massive form fading into shadows until she was gone. But not gone. Forever. I could still feel her presence, watching from the deep woods, ready to emerge if the sacred places were threatened again. Janet Morris was staring at me with wide eyes. "Elizabeth, are you okay?" I smiled at her, feeling power and responsibility settling into my bones like an old coat. "Better than okay," I said. "I'm finally home." The official report blamed everything on an unusually aggressive cougar that had been eliminated by wildlife control. Dr. Peterson backed up this story, partly because no one would believe the truth, and partly because he was terrified of what might happen if he kept talking about giant six-legged cats. Janet Morris left archaeology and became a Cherokee cultural liaison for the Tennessee Department of Natural Resources. She never spoke publicly about what she'd seen in the forest, but she made sure that future research projects got proper tribal approval before disturbing sacred sites. I resigned from the Park Service 2 weeks later. My supervisor wasn't surprised. He figured the stress of the cougar attacks had gotten to me. He was right, just not in the way he thought. I became a cultural preservation officer for the Cherokee Nation, working to protect sacred sites throughout Tennessee. The job pays less than park ranger work, but it matters more. Every burial ground we save, every ceremonial site we protect from development, it's part of keeping the old promises alive. Sarah adapted to the changes better than I expected. Kids are flexible that way. She started spending weekends with me in the forest, learning to read animal signs and identify sacred plants. She has the gift, too. I can see it in the way deer approach her without fear, the way she always knows which direction leads home. Sometimes, late at night, I feel Atzila's presence at the edge of my awareness. She's still out there, still watching, but she's not alone anymore. Or, the burden of protecting sacred places is shared now between the ancient guardian and the modern world. The Cherokee National Forest is safer because of what happened in 1988. Developers think twice before building near sites that might be sacred. Archaeologists ask permission before digging. Tourism companies train their guides to respect indigenous beliefs. But I know the protection goes deeper than human law or good intentions. There are things in the deep woods that are older than governments, older than universities, older than the idea that everything belongs to whoever has the right paperwork. The Wampus Cats domain isn't just a piece of forest marked on maps. It's the space between the world we think we understand and the world that actually exists. It's the reminder that some places are sacred, some things shouldn't be disturbed, and some guardians never rest. Last month, Sarah found tracks near our cabin. 6-toed paw prints, larger than any normal cat. She wasn't scared. "Is that the lady from your stories?" she asked. "Yes," I told her. "She's checking on us, making sure we're keeping our promises." Sarah nodded like this made perfect sense. "Should we leave her some food?" I smiled, remembering my grandmother's teachings about respecting the spirits that share our world. "Tobacco," I said. She'd prefer tobacco. That evening, we left a small bundle of traditional tobacco at the edge of the tree line. By morning, it was gone, and new claw marks decorated the oak tree where we'd placed it. 5 parallel lines carved deep into the bark. A signature, a blessing, a reminder that some contracts are written in blood and moonlight, and they last forever. The forest is quiet tonight, but it's not empty. It's never empty. And as long as people like Sarah and me remember the old promises, it never will be. The Wampus Cats domain endures, and so do the guard, lions who protect it. My name is Jonathan Steelwater, and I've been a park ranger at Blackwater Falls for 18 years. That's long enough to know every trail, every cliff, and every sound these woods make. My grandfather came here from Germany when he was young, looking for work in the coal mines. My father worked those same mines until his lungs gave out. Me? I chose the forest instead of going underground. I thought I knew everything about these woods. I was wrong. It was October of 1979, and the leaves were just starting to turn. The air had that crisp bite that makes you want to build a fire and tell stories. Perfect camping weather, which is why the Stone family had driven up from Charleston with their 2 kids. They'd reserved spot number 12, right near the creek where the water runs deep and dark between the rocks. I remember Gerald Stone shaking my hand when they checked in. Big guy, maybe 6'2", with calloused hands that said he worked for a living. His wife Sarah was quiet but friendly, and their kids, Emma, 12, and little Tommy, 8, were already bouncing around, excited to see the falls. "Any bears I should worry about?" Gerald asked, the way all the dads do. "Black bears, mostly," I told him. "They're getting ready for winter, so they might be a little more active. Just keep your food locked up tight, and you'll be fine." He nodded and loaded his family back into their station wagon. I watched them drive down the winding road toward the camping area, their headlights cutting through the early evening shadows. That was the last time I saw Gerald Stone alive. The first sign something was wrong came the next morning. I was doing my usual rounds when I noticed how quiet the woods were. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, even the insects seemed to have gone silent. In 18 years, I'd never heard the forest this quiet. Then I found the dog. It was hanging from a tree branch about 50 feet from the Stone family's campsite. A German shepherd, torn open from neck to belly. The strange thing was how it was positioned, like someone had carefully arranged it there. Not just thrown or caught on the branch, but placed with purpose. I cut the poor animal down and wrapped it in a tarp from my truck. The smell hit me then. Not just death, but something else. Something wild and wrong, like wet fur and old meat. That's when I heard Sarah Stone screaming. I ran toward their campsite, my boots slipping on the wet leaves. The family's blue tent was still standing, but the rain fly was shredded. Long tears in the fabric, like something with claws had tried to get inside. Sarah was kneeling beside the creek, holding her children close. Both kids were crying, and Sarah's face was white as paper. She kept looking around like something might come back. "Where's your husband?" I asked, though I already had a bad feeling about the answer. Sarah pointed toward the water with a shaking hand. He went to get water for coffee, about an hour ago. Then we heard this terrible sound like a dog howling, but wrong somehow. Then Emma screamed and we found—" She couldn't finish, but Emma spoke up, her voice small and frightened. "There was a man by the water, but he wasn't really a man. He was too tall and his head was wrong, like a wolf but walking on two legs, and his eyes were red, like fire." I looked where she was pointing and saw Gerald Stone lying face down in the shallow water. The creek ran red around him. I told Sarah to take the kids back to the visitor center and call for help. Then I waded into the creek to check on Gerald, though I already knew it was too late. I've seen dead people before. Car accidents, heart attacks, even a hunting accident or two. But I'd never seen anything like what happened to Gerald Stone. He was completely white, like all the blood had been drained out of him. 3 long cuts ran down his back, too deep and too clean to be from any animal I knew. The weird part was that there wasn't enough blood. A man Gerald's size should have bled plenty, but the water around him was only slightly pink. The tracks told an even stranger story. I've been reading animal tracks since I was 12 years old. My dad taught me because he said a man should know what's moving through his woods. These tracks didn't make sense. They started at the tree line as human footprints, bare feet, size 11 or 12. But as they got closer to the water, they changed. The heel stretched out, the toes got longer and sharper. By the time they reached the creek, they looked like wolf paws, but bigger than any wolf I'd ever seen. Then they just stopped, like whatever made them had disappeared into thin air. The state police showed up around noon. Detective Ray Morrison was a good man, but he looked at those tracks the same way I must have, like his brain couldn't quite accept what his eyes were seeing. "What do you think did this, Stillwater?" he asked, kneeling beside the strange prints. "I honestly don't know," I said. But Emma Stone saw something. She described it as a man with a wolf's head, walking upright. Ray spit into the leaves. "Kids see all kinds of things when they're scared. Probably just a black bear walking on its hind legs. They do that sometimes." I wanted to agree with him. Bears made sense. Bears were normal. But bears don't leave human footprints that turn into paw prints. And bears don't drain a grown man's blood without spilling it all over the ground. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Emma Stone's words. His eyes were red, like fire. I also kept thinking about something my grandfather used to say when I was little. He'd tell stories about the old country, about things that hunted in the Black Forest. Things that were part man, part wolf. "Werewolves," he'd whisper, making sure my grandmother wasn't listening. She thought such talk was foolish. "They came with us to America, you know. Evil follows people wherever they go." I'd always thought those were just stories to scare children. Now I wasn't so sure. The next day I drove into town to look through the old records at the library. Mrs. Henderson, the librarian, was happy to help me dig through the historical files. What I found made my blood run cold. 1956. The Muller family camping near Blackwater Falls. Father found dead by the creek, drained of blood. Witnesses described a large wolf walking like a man. 1933. The Brenner family. Same area, same description. Father dead, no blood at the scene. 1910. The Hoffman family. By now I was starting to see the pattern. Every 23 years, always in October, always the same kind of attack. And all the families had German names, just like mine. I was still reading when Mrs. Henderson tapped me on the shoulder. "You might want to see this," she said, holding an old leather journal. This belonged to Father Klaus Brenner. He was a missionary who worked with the German settlers in the 1790s. I opened the journal carefully. The pages were yellow and brittle, covered in old German writing. But there were parts in English, translations Father Brenner had made for his American congregation. One entry stopped me cold. "The beast came again last night. Poor Heinrich Muller is dead, drained like the others. The creature grows bolder. It no longer fears our iron crosses or holy water. I believe it is the spirit of Klaus Weber, the deserter who murdered the Steiner family during the war. He was cursed to walk between man and wolf, to hunt the bloodlines of those he wronged. Every generation, it returns to feed." I looked at the date. October 15th, 1790. Today was October 13th, 1979, which meant tomorrow night, the beast would hunt again. I drove straight to the park office and pulled the camping registration book. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the pages, looking for German surnames. There, registered for sites 14 and 15, the Muller family from Pittsburgh. Heinrich and Greta Mueller with their 3 sons, Wilhelm, age 16, Klaus, age 14, and little Hans, age 10. They'd arrived yesterday, the day after Gerald Stone was killed. I grabbed my radio and tried calling the main office, but all I got was static. The mountains played hell with radio signals sometimes. I jumped in my truck and drove down to their campsite as fast as I dared on the winding road. The Mueller family had set up a neat camp with 2 large tents and a careful fire ring. Heinrich was splitting wood while his wife prepared dinner. The 3 boys were exploring near the creek, their voices echoing off the canyon walls. "Mr. Mueller," I called out, trying to keep my voice calm. "I need to talk to you about something important." Heinrich was a big man like Gerald Stone had been, with the same kind of working hands. He looked up from his wood splitting with a friendly smile. "Of course, Ranger. What can we do for you?" "I think your family might be in danger," I said. "There was an incident yesterday. A camper was killed, and I have reason to believe the thing that killed him might come after your family next." Heinrich's smile faded. "What kind of thing?" I struggled with how to explain it. "The local records show a pattern. Every 23 years, families with German names are attacked by something. Always here, always in October." Greta Muller had stopped preparing dinner and was listening now. The boys had come closer, sensing adult worry the way children do. "Are you telling us there's some kind of serial killer?" Heinrich asked. "Not exactly," I said. "The witnesses describe something that's not quite human, something that walks on 2 legs but has the head of a wolf." Wilhelm, the oldest boy, laughed nervously. "You mean like a werewolf? Come on, that's just old stories." "Maybe," I said. "But 4 families are dead, and they all have them. Names like yours. German names. I'm asking you to pack up and leave. Tonight." Heinrich looked at his wife, then back at me. "Ranger, I appreciate your concern, but we drove 6 hours to get here. The boys have been looking forward to this trip for months. We can't just run away because of some old superstition." I pulled out copies of the newspaper articles I'd found. "This isn't superstition. These people are really dead." Heinrich studied the papers, his face growing serious. But then he shrugged. "Probably a bear. Maybe the same bear if they live that long. We'll be careful. Keep our food locked up tight, just like you told us." I wanted to grab him and shake him, make him understand, but what could I say? That my German grandfather's bedtime stories were real? that something supernatural was stalking families in these woods. At least stay close to your camp tonight, I said. And if you hear anything strange, anything at all, fire 3 shots into the air. I'll come running. Heinrich nodded and shook my hand. We'll be careful, Ranger. Thank you for the warning. I drove back to my cabin, but I couldn't sit still. As the sun went down, I loaded my rifle and checked my flashlight batteries. Then I drove back toward the Mueller campsite and parked about a quarter-mile away, where I could watch their fire through the trees. Around 10 o'clock, their fire started to die down. I could see the family moving around, getting ready for bed. The boys disappeared into one tent, Heinrich and Greta into the other. That's when the forest went completely silent again. It was like someone had thrown a switch. The insects stopped chirping. The wind stopped moving through the trees. Even the creek seemed to run quieter. I rolled down my truck windows and listened. Nothing. Then I heard it, a sound like a dog howling, but deeper and longer than any dog could manage. It had to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the canyon walls. The sound raised every hair on my body. It was filled with hunger and rage and something else. Something that sounded almost like laughter. Through my binoculars, I saw Heinrich unzip his tent and step outside. He had a flashlight in one hand and what looked like a hunting rifle in the other. "Hello?" he called out. "Who's out there?" The howling came again, closer this time. Heinrich swung his flashlight toward the tree line, and for just a moment I saw something in the beam. It stood about 6 feet tall, covered in dark fur. Its body was mostly human, but the head was long and narrow, like a wolf's. Its eyes reflected the light like mirrors, glowing red in the darkness. Heinrich raised his rifle, but the thing moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. 1 second it was 50 feet away, the next it was right in front of him. I heard Heinrich scream, then the rifle went off. Then, nothing. I grabbed my own rifle and ran toward the campsite, crashing through the brush like a madman. When I got there, Heinrich was lying next to his tent, and I could see right away he was dead. 3 long cuts across his chest, just like Gerald Stone. His blood was soaking into the ground, but there wasn't as much as there should have been. Greta was screaming from inside the tent. The boys were crying, but they were alive. "Get in your car," I shouted. "Now, drive to town and don't stop." Greta stumbled out of the tent, pulling little Hans with her. Wilhelm and Klaus were right behind them. They ran for their station wagon while I stood guard with my rifle. The forest was still silent, but I could feel something watching us. The air smelled like wet fur and old blood. "It's still here," Wilhelm said, his voice shaking. "I can feel it watching." He was right. I could feel it too, like cold fingers running down my spine. They piled into their car and Greta started the engine, but as they backed out of the campsite, their headlights swept across the tree line, and I saw it again. The creature was standing just inside the forest, watching us. In the headlight beam, I could see its face clearly for the first time. It had the long snout and pointed ears of a wolf, but the eyes were human, old, tired, and full of pain. Then it opened its mouth and spoke. The voice was rough, like someone who hadn't used it in a long time, but the words were clear. "Vergeltung," it said. "Revenge." The car's tires squealed as Greta floored the gas pedal. They disappeared down the road, leaving me alone with the thing in the woods. I kept my rifle trained on the tree line, but the creature had vanished again. I backed toward my truck, trying not to turn around. When I reached the driver's door, I heard that terrible howling again, but this time it was coming from the direction the Muellers had gone. I jumped in my truck and raced after them, my headlights cutting through the darkness. About a mile down the road, I found their station wagon stopped sideways across the pavement. The front windshield was smashed, and all 4 doors were hanging open. The Muellers were huddled together beside the road. Little Hans was crying, and Klaus looked like he might throw up. But they were all alive. "It jumped on the car," Greta said, her voice barely a whisper. "Right on the roof. Its claws came through the metal like it was paper." Wilhelm pointed back down the road. "It's following us. It won't let us leave." I looked where he was pointing and saw a pair of red eyes in the darkness. maybe 50 yards away. The creature was pacing back and forth across the road, blocking our escape. That's when I remembered Father Brenner's journal. He'd written about the beast being the spirit of Klaus Weber, cursed to hunt the families he'd wronged. But curses had rules. They had to have some way to be broken. "Wilhelm," I said. "What's your full name?" "Wilhelm Heinrich Müller," he said. "Why?" "Heinrich? The same name as the man the beast had killed in Father Brenner's time. This wasn't random. The creature was hunting specific bloodlines, specific names passed down through generations. Listen to me, carefully," I said. "This thing isn't just an animal. It's the spirit of a man who was cursed almost 200 years ago. He's been hunting your family ever since." "That's impossible," Greta whispered. "Your family came from Germany, right? Probably around 1790? Wilhelm nodded slowly. "Our great-great-grandfather Heinrich came over during the Revolutionary War. He was a soldier." The pieces were starting to fit together. "The beast was a deserter named Klaus Weber. He murdered a family during the war, probably your ancestors. He was cursed to hunt their bloodline forever." The red eyes were getting closer. I could hear the creature's claws scraping on the asphalt. "How do we stop it?" Wilhelm asked. I remembered more of Father Brenner's writing. "The curse can only be broken by a willing sacrifice from the bloodline. Someone has to face it willingly, without hatred." "You mean someone has to die?" Klaus asked, his voice cracking. "Not die," I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. "Face it. Show mercy instead of revenge." The creature stepped into my headlight beams. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Its fur was matted and dirty, and its claws were as long as my fingers. But its eyes still looked human, filled with an ancient sadness. Wilhelm stepped forward. "I'll do it." "No." Greta grabbed her son's arm. "You're just a boy." "I'm 16, Mom. I'm not a little kid anymore." Wilhelm looked at the creature, then back at his family. "And I'm the only one with the right name, Heinrich. It has to be me." I wanted to stop him, but I knew he was right. The curse was specific. It had rules that couldn't be broken. Wilhelm walked slowly toward the beast. It stopped pacing and watched him approach. When he was about 10 feet away, it spoke again. "Heinrich Müller," it said in that rough, unused voice. "Your blood will pay for old crimes." "I know who you are," Wilhelm said, his voice steady despite his fear. "You're Klaus Weber. You were a soldier who got scared and ran away. You killed innocent people." The creature snarled and raised its claws. "But I forgive you," Wilhelm continued. "I forgive you for what you did to my family. You've been punished enough." For a moment, nothing happened. Then the creature's shape began to blur and change. The fur faded away. The claws shrank back, and suddenly, a man was standing there. He was thin and pale, wearing the rotted remains of a Revolutionary War uniform. "I'm sorry," Klaus Weber whispered. "I was so hungry, so afraid. I just wanted to go home." "I know," Wilhelm said. "You can go home now." The spirit looked up at the stars. And for the first time in almost 200 years, Klaus Weber smiled. Then he faded away like morning mist, and the forest came alive again with the sounds of insects and wind through the trees. That was 45 years ago, and I'm an old man now. I retired from the Park Service in 1995, but I still live here in the mountains. The Müller family sends me a Christmas card every year. Wilhelm became a teacher, Klaus is a doctor, and Hans runs a small business in Pittsburgh. Greta lived to be 93, and she never forgot what happened that night. The attacks stopped. Every 23 years since 1979, I've watched and waited during the October camping season, but the beast never returned. The curse was broken, just like Father Brenner had written it could be. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the forest goes still, I remember those red eyes and that voice speaking a single word. Vergeltung. Revenge. The thing about curses is that they leave marks on the places where they happened. The woods around Blackwater Falls still remember what stalked there for almost 2 centuries. Animals avoid certain spots. Campers report feeling watched. And sometimes hikers find strange tracks in the mud. Tracks that start as human footprints and change into something else. I tell people it's just stories, old legends that got mixed up with reality. Most of them believe me, and that's probably for the best. But some of the older folks, especially those with German names, they look at me with knowing eyes. They remember the stories their grandparents told them about things that followed their families from the old country. Evil follows people wherever they go, my grandfather used to say. But so does forgiveness, and sometimes that's enough to set things right. I still keep a rifle by my bed, though, just in case something else is out there, waiting for its turn to hunt. Because the Black Forest was full of dark things, and our ancestors brought more than just werewolves to America. They brought all their fears, all their guilt, and all their unfinished business. Most of it sleeps quietly in the ground, waiting for the right time to wake up. Most of it, but not all. My name is Nathan Crowfeather, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. I've seen bears attack hikers, found bodies that fell off cliffs, and pulled lost kids out of caves. But what happened at Whispering Creek still keeps me awake at night. I'm part Cherokee, part Scottish. My grandmother used to tell me old stories about places in the mountains where the dead sing. I never believed her. Thought it was just old woman talk to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. I wish I'd listened. It was July 15th, 1967. Hot as blazes, even up in the Smokies. I was drinking too much back then. Had been since my wife Sarah died of cancer 2 years before. The bottle helped me sleep, or at least that's what I told myself. The call came in around noon. 5 people missing, a family from Atlanta. Tom and Linda Harrison with their 3 kids, Bobby, 12, Jenny, 10, and little Sarah, 8. Yes, same name as my wife. That should have warned me right there. They'd been camping illegally in a restricted area called Whispering Creek. It's 8 miles up a trail that most folks can't handle. The Forest Service keeps it closed because the terrain is dangerous. Lots of caves and drop-offs. But some people think rules don't apply to them. I hiked in alone. Should have brought backup, but I was still angry about being called away from my lunch break. The whiskey from the night before was making my head pound, and I wanted to get this over with quick. The trail got weird about 6 miles in. You know how forests sound? Birds singing, bugs buzzing, leaves rustling in the wind. But this place went quiet. Dead quiet. Even my footsteps seemed too loud. I found their campsite in a clearing next to the creek. 2 tents, still zipped up tight. A fire pit with ashes that were stone cold. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. There was food on a camp table. Sandwiches with 1 bite. Taken out. A cup of coffee that was still warm. Like they'd just vanished in the middle of eating lunch. I called out their names. Tom, Linda, kids. My voice echoed off the rocks, but nothing came back. Not even a bird call. That's when I saw the toys. Someone had arranged the kids' stuff in a perfect circle around the fire pit. A teddy bear, some toy cars, a doll with blonde hair like little Sarah's. They were placed just so, like they meant something, like they were part of some kind of ceremony. The hair on my neck stood up. In 16 years of ranger work, I've never seen anything like that. Kids don't play that way, and parents sure don't arrange toys in ritual circles. I got out my radio to call for backup. Nothing but static. Tried different channels, even the emergency frequency. Just white noise and something that sounded almost like singing. Very faint, like it was coming from far away. My compass started acting up too. The needle spun in circles, then locked, pointing toward a dark opening in the rocks about 50 yards away. A cave mouth I hadn't noticed before, even though it was big enough to drive a truck through. That's when I heard it for real. Not static from the radio, but actual singing. Voices in harmony coming from somewhere deep in that cave. The language was Cherokee. I recognized some words from when my grandmother sang the old songs. But Cherokee death songs don't get sung by white folks from Atlanta. I checked my service weapon and flashlight. Protocol said wait for backup, but those people might be hurt and need help. I couldn't just stand there while kids were in danger. The cave mouth was covered in old rock paintings, Cherokee symbols I'd seen in museums, warnings about spirits and hungry ghosts. Tourist stuff, I thought. Some college kids probably painted them as a prank. I was wrong about a lot of things that day. The temperature dropped 20 degrees the second I stepped into that cave. In July, in the middle of a heat wave, I could see my breath. My flashlight beam seemed weak, like the darkness was swallowing it up. The singing got louder. Multiple voices now, men and women rising and falling in harmonies that made my bones ache. I knew those songs, funeral songs my grandmother hummed when she thought no one was listening. The cave went back further than my light could reach. The walls were smooth, carved by water over thousands of years. But mixed in with the natural rock formations were man-made things, old things. I found pottery first. Cherokee clay pots, the kind my people made before the white man came. They were arranged along the walls like decorations, but they were full of something dark that might have been blood. Then I found the bones. Human bones, old and yellow, scattered around what looked like a camping area from long ago. Rotted blankets, pieces of leather clothing, tools made from stone and wood. This wasn't a tourist cave. People had lived here, died here. My grandmother's stories came flooding back. She'd told me about the Trail of Tears, how our people were forced to march west in 1838. Some families tried to hide in the mountains instead of going to the reservation. They starved in caves like this one, waiting for soldiers to stop looking for them. The singing was so loud now it seemed to come from the walls themselves. My flashlight flickered, and in the brief darkness, I saw something move. A figure in white, just at the edge of my vision. When the light came back steady, nothing was there. I kept going deeper. Had to find that family. The cave opened into a bigger chamber, and that's where I found the modern camping gear. Sleeping bags, a Coleman lantern, food containers, all scattered around like someone had gone through them in a hurry. "Tom," I called out. "Linda, can you hear me?" The singing stopped. Dead silence that was somehow worse than the noise. I could hear my heart beating, my breath echoing off the cave walls. Then, from somewhere, deeper in the cave, a voice called back, "Help us!" It was a man's voice, weak and scared. Tom Harrison. Had to be. I followed the sound through a narrow passage that opened into another chamber. This one was bigger, with a ceiling so high my flashlight couldn't find it. And hanging from somewhere up in that darkness was a shape that made me sick to my stomach. A man's body, suspended by ropes or vines, arms spread wide like he was being crucified. His skin was white as paper, drained of all color. His eyes were open, but empty. Tom Harrison. Had to be. But he'd been missing less than 24 hours. Nobody gets that pale that fast. "Oh, Jesus," I whispered. That's when I heard the children crying. The sound came from even deeper in the cave system. 3 kids, sobbing like their hearts were broken. I ran toward the noise, my flashlight beam bouncing wild off the walls. I found them in a circular chamber that felt like the inside of a church. Linda Harrison was there too, sitting against the wall with her arms around her children. They were all alive, but they looked terrible, pale and thin, like they hadn't eaten in weeks instead of hours. "Ma'am, I'm Ranger Crowfeather," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm here to get you out." Linda looked up at me with eyes that seemed too big for her face. "The singing," she whispered. "They won't stop singing." "Who won't stop singing?" She pointed behind me. I turned around and nearly dropped my flashlight. There were people standing around the chamber. Men, women, children, all dressed in old-fashioned Cherokee clothing, buckskin and cloth, beads and feathers. Their skin was gray-white, like Tom's, and their eyes were black holes. But they were translucent. I could see the cave wall through them. The oldest one, a woman with long gray hair, stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was like wind through dry leaves. "You have a Cherokee blood," she said in English with an accent I'd never heard before. We can smell it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the flashlight. Who are you? We are the hidden ones, the families who would not walk the white man's trail of tears. We came to these caves to wait for the soldiers to leave. Her face was sad and terrible. We are still waiting. You're dead, I said, because it was obvious, but I needed to say it out loud. Yes, starved to death in 1838. But we cannot rest while our bodies lie in unmarked graves, so we take the life force from the living to keep our spirits strong. I looked at the Harrison family. They were definitely weaker than they should be, like something was draining them slowly. Let them go, I said. They're not part of this. The ghost woman smiled, showing teeth like old ivory. All who enter our resting place become part of this. But you are different. You carry the blood of our people. More spirits appeared around the chamber. Dozens of them, all with that same starved, desperate look. Men who'd died trying to protect their families. Women who'd watched their children waste away. Kids who'd never had a chance to grow up. We have been feeding on these people since yesterday, another spirit said. An old man with a chief's headdress made of bones. Soon they will join us, but you could help us find peace instead. How? Give us proper burial. Perform the tobacco ceremony for our bones. Send our spirits to the next world where we belong. I thought about my grandmother's teachings, the old ways I'd forgotten when I started drinking. I don't remember all the words. Then we will teach you. But first, the woman gestured to the Harrison family. They must stay until the ritual is complete. Insurance that you will return. Linda Harrison started crying again. Her kids pressed closer to her, and I could see they were getting weaker by the minute. No deal, I said. Let them go first. The spirits moved closer, surrounding me. The temperature dropped even more, and frost started for Ming on the cave walls. You are not in a position to bargain, the old chief said. That's when I made the stupidest, bravest decision of my life. I pulled out my service knife and cut a deep line across my palm. Blood welled up, dark red in the flashlight beam. I offer my blood to the earth, I said in Cherokee, the words coming back to me from childhood ceremonies. I am Nathan Crowfeather, grandson of Mary Dear Woman, son of Robert Walking Bear. This blood connects me to all who came before. The spirits stopped moving. They stared at my bleeding hand like it was the most beautiful thing they'd ever seen. Cherokee blood, the old woman whispered. Strong blood, old blood. I let the blood drip onto the cave floor. My grandmother told me our blood belongs to the land, that it calls to the spirits of our ancestors. Is that true? Very true, said the chief. We can taste your grandmother's line. She was a keeper of the old ways. Then accept this offering and let these people go. They have children, just like you did. You know what it's like to watch kids suffer. For a long moment, nobody moved. The spirits whispered to each other in Cherokee, too old and fast for me to follow. Then the woman nodded. We will release them, she said. But you must stay. You must help us find rest, or we will hunt others. Forever. I looked at Linda Harrison and her kids. They were barely conscious now, leaning against each other like they couldn't sit up on their own. Deal, I said. The spirits stepped back, and suddenly the Harrisons looked better. Color came back to their faces, and little Sarah opened her eyes properly for the first time. Get out of here, I told Linda. Follow the cave back the way I came. Don't stop. Don't look back. When you get outside, walk straight down the trail to the parking area. Someone will find you. What about you? Linda asked. I'll be fine, and I lied. Go, now. She helped her kids to their feet, and they stumbled toward the cave entrance. I waited until I couldn't hear their footsteps anymore. Then I was alone with the dead. Now, said the old woman, you will help us. Where are your bodies buried? Follow us. The spirits led me deeper into the cave system, through passages I would never have found on my own. My flashlight was dying, but somehow I could see them clearly now. They glowed with a soft, cold light that made everything look like a black and white photograph. We came to a huge underground chamber with a pool of black water in the center. The spirits stopped at the water's edge. "Here," said the chief. "We threw our dead into the sacred pool when they could no longer fight the hunger. 37 souls rest beneath these waters." I knelt by the pool. The water was so dark I couldn't see the bottom, but I could feel something down there. A presence that was both sad and angry. "What do I need to do?" The old woman knelt beside me. "The tobacco ceremony. Offer sacred smoke to the 4 directions. Ask the spirits to guide our souls to the next world. But first, you must call our names." "I don't know your names." "We will tell you." And they did. One by one, 37 spirits told me their names. Cherokee names from before the white man came, names that had been forgotten by everyone still living. I repeated each one, feeling the weight of all that lost history. When the last name was spoken, the old woman handed me something, a small pouch made from doeskin. "Sacred tobacco," she said, "saved from the old homeland. We have guarded it for over a century, waiting for someone who could use it properly." My hands were shaking as I opened the pouch. The tobacco inside was dry as dust, but it smelled like home, like my grandmother's house on ceremony days. I didn't have a proper pipe, so I made a small fire with matches and some dry wood from the cave floor. I sprinkled the tobacco on the flames and watched it burn. "Grandfather's spirits of the East," I began, remembering the woe cards my grandmother had taught me. "Accept these souls who have waited too long in the shadow world. Guide them to the place where there is no hunger, no cold, no fear." I turned to each direction, south, west, north, and repeated the prayer. The spirits watched in silence, their faces full of hope for the first time. The tobacco smoke rose up toward the cave ceiling, and something amazing happened. The pool of black water began to glow. Soft, golden light came from somewhere deep below the surface. "It is working," the old woman said. "We can feel the path opening." But then the cave started to shake. Rocks fell from the ceiling, splashing into the pool. The spirits flickered like candle flames in a strong wind. "What's happening?" I shouted over the rumbling. "The ceremony is breaking the bonds that hold us here," the chief called back. "But it is also breaking the bonds that hold this place together. You must leave. Now." "What about you?" "We go to the spirit world. You go back to the world of the living. Run." I ran. Behind me I could hear the cave system collapsing, tons of rock falling, underground streams breaking free, the mountain itself reshaping around the empty spaces where the spirits had lived for over a century. My flashlight finally died, but somehow I could still see. A warm wind was pushing me forward, guiding me through passages that were crumbling as I passed. The spirits were helping me one last time. I burst out of the cave mouth just as the whole cliff face came down. Boulders the size of cars crashed into the creek. Dust and debris filled the air. When it cleared, the cave entrance was completely sealed. The Harrison family was waiting by their campsite, looking scared but healthy. Tom was there too, somehow alive, though he swore he didn't remember anything after going to sleep the night before. "What happened in there?" Linda asked. I looked on, ked back at the pile of rocks that had been a cave. "Gas leak," I said. "Made you all sick, made you hallucinate. Tom, you must have wandered around confused and hit your head. Lucky you all got out when you did." It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that lets people sleep at night. We hiked out together, the Harrison family and me. They were quiet, still shaken by their experience. The kids held their parents' hands tight, like they were afraid of getting separated again. When we reached the ranger station, I called for medical transport. The family was taken to the hospital for observation, though the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with them except exhaustion and mild dehydration. Tom Harrison died 3 days later. Heart failure, the doctors said. No explanation for it. He was only 35, in good health, no history of heart problems. His body just stopped working. I knew what had really killed him. The spirits had taken too much of his life force before I made my deal with them. Some damage can't be undone. I didn't go to the funeral. Instead, I drove up to the mountain where my grandmother was buried and sat by her grave for a long time. "I heard them singing, grandmother," I said to the headstone. "The hungry ghosts you warned me about. I helped them find peace, but it cost a man's life." The wind through the pine trees sounded almost like an answer, almost like my grandmother's voice saying, "Some prices must be paid, grandson. You did what was needed." I quit drinking that day, poured out every bottle in my house, and never touched alcohol again. The Cherokee spirits had reminded me who I was supposed to be, a keeper of the old ways, a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the dead. I started studying my grandmother's language seriously, learned the ceremonies I should have learned as a boy, found other Cherokee elders who could teach me the songs and stories I'd forgotten in my grief over Sarah. 2 months after the cave-in, I got a letter from the state archaeological department. Someone had given them an anonymous tip about a historic Cherokee burial site near Whispering Creek. They wanted to do a survey, maybe create a memorial. I led them to the site myself. We found the remains of 37 people buried in a natural sinkhole about a mile from where the cave used to be. Carbon dating confirmed they died around 1838. The Cherokee Nation gave them a proper burial with full honors. Linda Harrison and her kids moved away from Atlanta. She sent me a Christmas card that year thanking me for saving their lives. She didn't mention the cave or the singing. I think she'd convinced herself it was all hallucinations from a gas leak, like I'd told her. Sometimes believing a lie is healthier than remembering the truth. But I remember. I remember every detail of that day in the cave, and sometimes, when I'm hiking alone in the deep woods, I still hear Cherokee voices singing in the distance. Not death songs this time, but songs of celebration, songs of joy. The spirits found their peace, but they left me with a job to do. That was 58 years ago. I'm an old man now, retired from the Park Service, but still living in the same cabin at the edge of the Smokies. People call me when they need help with things the regular authorities can't handle. Strange things. Supernatural things. The Cherokee spirits aren't the only ones in these mountains. Last month, a college hiking group reported hearing voices near the sealed cave site. Not Cherokee voices this time. English, with southern accents. A family that got lost in a blizzard back in 1952. Their bodies were never found. I'm too old to go spelunking anymore, but I know what needs to be done. The old ways work, if you remember how to use them. Blood calls to blood, spirit calls to spirit. The dead want peace, not revenge, but sometimes they need help finding it. I've trained my nephew David in the ceremonies. He's half Cherokee like me, and he believes in the old stories. When my time comes, he'll take over. The mountain spirits need someone to speak for them, someone who understands that the past doesn't just disappear when we stop thinking about it. The Harrison family still sends me Christmas cards. Linda's kids are grown now, with children of their own. They never talk about what happened in the cave, but little Sarah, who's not so little anymore, always includes a note thanking me for saving us from the dark place. She remembers more than her mother thinks she does. Sometimes tourists ask me about Whispering Creek. They want to know if the ghost stories are true, if there's really something supernatural in those woods. I tell them what my grandmother told me. Respect the places where people suffered and died. Don't go looking for spirits unless you're prepared to help them. And always remember that the dead were once as alive as you are, with families they loved and dreams they couldn't fulfill. The Cherokee spirits taught me that some hungers last beyond death. The hunger for justice, the hunger for remembrance, the hunger for peace. Most of all, they taught me that we're all connected, the living and the dead, the past and the present. What we do echoes forward through time, just like what our ancestors did echoes back to us. On quiet nights, when the wind is just right, I can still hear them singing in the distance. Not the hungry ghosts of Whispering Creek, but the spirits of all my Cherokee ancestors, welcoming their lost children home at last. The hollow singers have found their voice again, and in their songs, I hear the promise that none of us, living or dead, are ever truly forgotten. That's my story. Believe it or don't. But if you ever find yourself in the Smoky Mountains and you hear voices singing in a language you don't understand, Show some respect. The dead have long memories, and they're always listening. My name is Samuel Blackthorne, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years in the Daniel Boone National Forest. People think my job is about helping lost hikers and giving nature talks to school kids. They're wrong. Most of my time is spent hunting down illegal operations hidden deep in these Kentucky mountains. Drug labs, illegal hunting, and especially moonshine stills. I've busted 47 moonshine operations in my career. I know every ridge, every hollow, every old logging road where someone might set up shop. The mountain families around here have been making corn liquor for generations, passed down from their Scottish and Irish ancestors. Most of them I leave alone. They're just carrying on tradition, making small batches for family and friends. It's the outsiders I go after, the ones who come in with big operations, cutting corners, polluting the water, and making quick money off our land. My granddaddy used to tell stories about things in these mountains. Booger men, he called them. Creatures that would punish folks who broke the old mountain laws. Said they looked like giant men covered in dark fur, with eyes that glowed red in the dark. I always figured those were just stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods at night. That was before Copper Creek Hollow. It was October 1976 when I got the call. Hiker found something strange up in the hills, wouldn't say what over the radio. Just kept repeating that I needed to see it for myself. His voice was shaking so bad I could barely understand him. I loaded my gear into the Jeep and drove the winding mountain roads until I reached the trailhead. The hiker, a college kid from Louisville, was sitting on a rock looking pale as moonlight. "You the ranger?" he asked, standing up on shaky legs. "That's right, Samuel Blackthorne. What did you find up there?" He pointed up the trail with a tremblative finger. "About 2 miles up, there's a clearing. I was looking for a place to camp when I smelled it." "Smelled what?" "Death," he whispered. "Something's dead up there, something big." I grabbed my pack and started up the trail. The kid followed behind me, not saying much. The October air was crisp and the leaves crunched under our boots. Everything seemed normal until we got about halfway up. That's when I noticed the silence. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects had gone quiet. The only sound was our footsteps and the wind through the trees. "This is where it starts," the kid said, stopping dead in his tracks. I looked around. The trees looked wrong somehow. Not dying exactly, but tired. Like the life was slowly draining out of them. Some of the leaves had fallen in perfect circles around the base of each tree, which made no sense with the way the wind was blowing. "Come on," I said, but I had to force myself to keep walking. The smell hit me about 50 yards before we reached the clearing. Sweet and rotten, like fruit that had been left in the sun too long. But underneath that was something else, something that made my stomach turn. When we crested the small ridge and looked down into the clearing, I understood why the kid had been shaking. 5 men lay in a perfect circle around what had once been a moonshine still. The still itself was destroyed, but not in any way I'd ever seen. The copper tubing was twisted into impossible knots, like someone had tied them by hand. But copper tubing is tough. It would take machinery to bend it like that. The men were all face up, arms at their sides, staring at the sky with expressions of pure terror frozen on their faces. No signs of struggle. Their weapons, and I could see at least 3 rifles, were still in their holsters and cases, unfired. "Jesus," I whispered. I'd seen plenty of crime, scenes in my 12 years as a ranger, drug deals gone bad, hunting accidents, even a murder or 2. But this was different. This felt arranged. I walked carefully around the circle, trying not to disturb anything. The ground around the still was dead. Not just the grass, but the dirt itself looked gray and lifeless. It formed a perfect circle about 20 feet across, with the twisted still in the center and the 5 bodies evenly spaced around the edge. "You recognize any of them?" I asked the hiker. He shook his head quickly. I didn't get close enough to look at their faces. I did, though. I had to. It was my job. All 5 were strangers to me, city folks by the look of their clothes and gear. They had expensive equipment, the kind you don't see from local mountain families. This was a commercial operation, probably run by outsiders looking to make quick money. But what had killed them? There were no wounds I could see, no blood, no signs of violence. Just 5 men arranged in a circle, scared to death. Literally scared to death, I realized as I knelt beside the nearest body. His heart had given out. I could tell from the way his face was twisted. But what could frighten a grown man so badly that his heart would stop? As I stood up, something caught my eye. Carved into the nearest tree, about 8 feet off the ground, was a symbol I'd never seen before. It looked like a combination of scratches and lines, too deliberate to be natural, too high up to be made by any normal person. The wind picked up, and I heard something that made my blood run cold. From somewhere deeper in the woods came a sound like breathing, slow, deep breaths that seemed to echo off the mountains themselves. "We need to go," I said quickly. "Now!" The kid didn't argue. We practically ran back down the trail, and I didn't feel safe until we were in my Jeep driving back to town. That night, I called the state police and reported the deaths. They came up the next day with a full investigation team. Their report said the 5 men had died of simultaneous heart attacks. Cause unknown. The still had been destroyed by person or persons unknown, probably with heavy machinery. But I knew better. You don't get machinery into Copper Creek Hollow. The trail's too narrow, too steep, and you sure don't get 5 healthy men to die of heart attacks at the exact same time. I started asking questions around town. The mountain families I'd known for years suddenly got quiet when I brought up Copper Creek Hollow. Old Martha Hensley, whose family had been making moonshine since before the Civil War, just shook her head when I asked her about it. "Some places ain't meant for outsiders," she said. "Some things don't like being disturbed." "What kind of things, Martha?" She looked me in the eye, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Fear. "The kind that's been here longer than we have," she whispered. "The kind that remembers the old laws." 3 weeks after Copper Creek Hollow, I thought I was done with the whole mess. The state police had closed their investigation, ruling it death by natural causes. The families of the 5 dead men had come to collect the bodies, and as far as the official records went, that was the end of it. But the mountains don't forget that easily. I was patrolling the eastern section of the forest when I got a radio call from dispatch. Hunters had found something unusual near Blackberry Ridge, another destroyed operation, this time a marijuana growing site. "Same kind of destruction?" I asked into my radio. "That's what they're saying," came the crackling reply. "Strange enough that they called it in instead of just walking away." I knew the area well. Blackberry Ridge was about 10 miles from Copper Creek Hollow, connected by old mining roads that most people had forgotten about. If someone was running a drug operation up there, they'd picked a good spot to stay hidden. The hunters met me at the trailhead, 2 Lake Chihuahua. Local men I recognized, the Jameson brothers. They looked nervous, kept glancing back toward the woods like they expected something to follow them out. "It's about a mile up the old mining road," Tom Jameson said. "But I'm telling you right now, Ranger, we ain't going back up there with you." "Why not?" The brothers exchanged a look. "You'll see," was all his brother Jake would say. I hiked up alone, following the overgrown mining road. The day was overcast, with thick clouds that made the forest darker than it should have been in the afternoon. I kept my hand near my radio, though I wasn't sure what I'd call in if something happened. The marijuana plants were easy to spot once I found them. About 50 plants arranged in neat rows in a clearing that had been cut out of the forest. Someone had put serious work into this operation. There was an irrigation system made from stolen PVC pipe, expensive growing equipment, and enough fertilizer to keep the plants healthy through the season. Had been enough anyway. Now everything was dead. Not just the marijuana plants. Everything. Every tree within 30 feet of the growing site was brown and lifeless. The grass had turned black. Even the rocks looked somehow wrong, like they'd been drained of something vital. And in the center of the dead zone, arranged in the same perfect circle I'd seen at Copper Creek Hollow, were 3 more bodies. I approached carefully, my heart pounding. Same setup as before, 3 men lying face up, arms at their sides, expressions of absolute terror on their faces. No signs of struggle, no wounds, no blood. Just death by fear. But this time, something was different. These men weren't strangers. I recognized 2 of them, small-time dealers from Lexington who'd been arrested before for running drugs through the national forest. The 3rd man I didn't know, but he looked like city folk, probably their supplier or partner. What bothered me most was how fresh everything looked. The hunters had found this site that morning, but the bodies couldn't have been dead more than a day or 2, which meant whatever had happened here had happened recently. Very recently. I was examining the irrigation system, which had been torn apart with the same impossible strength I'd seen at the moonshine still, when I heard it. The same sound I'd heard at Copper Creek Hollow. Slow, deep breathing that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I froze, listening. The breathing continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. The silence that followed was so complete, it made my ears ring. That's when I saw the tracks. They started at the edge of the dead zone and led deeper into the forest. At first glance, they looked almost human, the right general shape and size. But no human I'd ever seen had feet that big. These tracks were easily twice the size of my boots, with what looked like claw marks at the tips of the toes. I followed them for about 50 yards until they led to a tree that had to be over 100 years old. The tracks stopped at the base of the tree, but carved into the bark about 10 feet up was the same symbol I'd seen at Copper Creek Hollow. As I stood there staring at the carving, I heard branches breaking somewhere above me. I looked up just in time to see something large moving through the canopy, something too big to be a bear, too fast to be human. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Ranger Blackthorn, this is dispatch. Do you copy?" I grabbed the radio with shaking hands. "This is Blackthorn. Go ahead." "We've got another report coming in from the south side of the forest. Hunters found what looks like another drug lab. Destroyed, same as the others." My blood went cold. "When?" "Call came in about 20 minutes ago." 20 minutes ago, I'd been hiking up to Blackberry Ridge. Whatever had destroyed that 3rd site had been busy while I was examining the 2nd one. "I'll head over there now," I said into the radio. "Copy that." "And Ranger?" "The hunters who called it in, they mentioned seeing something moving in the woods, something big. Might want to be extra careful." I looked back up at the trees where I'd seen the movement, but everything was still now, too still. As I hiked back down the mining road, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every few steps I'd stop and listen, but all I heard was my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots. When I reached my Jeep, I found something that made my blood run cold. Carved into the driver's side door, right where I couldn't miss it, was the same symbol I'd seen on the trees. Someone, or something, knew who I was, and they wanted me to know they were watching. I drove to the 3rd site with my rifle loaded and ready on the seat beside me. But when I got there, I found the same thing I'd found at the other 2 sites: dead plants, destroyed equipment, and bodies arranged in a perfect circle. This time, there were 4 of them. As I examined the scene, I noticed something else. The destruction was getting more artistic. The equipment wasn't just broken. It was arranged in patterns. The dead plants were laid out in spirals. Even the bodies were positioned more carefully, their hands folded, their eyes closed. Someone was taking pride in their work. I was photographing the scene when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, raising my rifle, but saw only an old Cherokee man standing at the edge of the clearing. He was wearing traditional clothes and watching me with dark, serious eyes. "You're the ranger," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's right. Samuel Blackthorn. You shouldn't be here. This is a crime scene." The old man smiled sadly. "Crime scene. Is that what you call it? What would you call it?" He walked to the edge of the dead zone, careful not to step inside the circle of destruction. "Justice," he said quietly. "Old justice. The kind that was here before your laws. What do you know about this? The Cherokee man looked at me for a long moment. I know you're asking the wrong questions, Ranger. You want to know who did this. You should be asking why. Okay, why? Because some things are sacred, and some things don't like being violated by greedy men. He turned and walked back into the forest before I could ask him anything else. By the time I finished photographing the scene and hiked back to where I'd seen him, he was gone. That night, I sat in my cabin trying to make sense of what I'd seen. 3 destroyed operations in 3 weeks, 11 dead men, all killed by fear, equipment destroyed by impossible strength, and symbols carved high in trees by something that could climb like a monkey and carve like a man. I pulled out my maps and marked the 3 locations. They formed a rough triangle, with each site about 10 miles from the others. All of them were in remote areas where outsiders might set up illegal operations. All of them were places the local mountain families avoided. And all of them, I realized as I studied the topographical maps, were in areas that had been sacred to the Cherokee before they were forced out in the 1830s. I was starting to understand that I wasn't dealing with a person at all. I was dealing with something that had been in these mountains a lot longer than I had. The next month brought 3 more destroyed sites and 9 more dead men. Word was spreading through the criminal networks that something in the Daniel Boone Forest was hunting down illegal operations. Some of the smarter ones packed up and moved their business elsewhere. Others figured it was just a rival gang trying to scare off competition. They were wrong. I started carrying a camera with me everywhere, documenting each site. The patterns were getting clearer. Every operation destroyed belonged to outsiders, people who had no connection to the local mountain families. Every site was in an area that had spiritual significance to the Cherokee or the early settlers. And every scene showed the same impossible evidence of supernatural strength. But it was the 7th site that changed everything. I got the call on a Thursday morning in November. A deer hunter had found bodies near Devil's Backbone Ridge, a narrow strip of rock that ran along the top of the mountain like the spine of some huge buried creature. How many this time? I asked dispatch. Hunter wasn't sure. Said there were too many to count. I felt ice form in my stomach. The previous attacks had targeted small operations, 3 to 5 people at most. If there were too many to count, something had escalated. Devil's Backbone Ridge was a hard climb, even for someone in good shape. The trail was steep and narrow, winding through dense forest and over rock faces that required careful navigation. By the time I reached the top, I was breathing hard and sweating despite the cold November air. The smell hit me before I saw anything else. Sweet rot, but stronger than before. Much stronger. The clearing at the top of Devil's Backbone was about the size of a football field, and it had been home to the biggest drug operation I'd ever seen in the forest. Industrial-scale equipment for processing cocaine, generators to power everything, enough supplies to keep a dozen people busy for months. Now it was all destroyed and arranged in the most elaborate pattern yet. 12 men lay in a perfect spiral around the remains of the operation. The equipment had been twisted into artistic shapes, metal sculptures that would have been beautiful if they weren't made from destroyed drug lab gear. The spiral of bodies led to the center, where someone had built a small altar from stacked stones. And on top of the altar was something that made my hands shake as I tried to photograph it. A human skull, old and yellowed with age. Carved into the forehead was the same symbol I'd been seeing at every site. But this skull was different, larger than normal, with teeth that were too sharp and eye sockets that were too deep. I was studying the skull when I heard movement behind me. I turned around and found myself face to face with the Cherokee man I'd met at the 3rd site. "You came back," I said. "I never left," he replied. "I've been watching you, Ranger, watching to see what kind of man you are." "What kind of man am I?" "The kind who asks questions instead of running away. The kind who might be able to understand." He walked past me to the stone altar and touched the skull gently, like he was greeting an old friend. "This belonged to the first one," he said. "The first guardian these mountains ever had. Cherokee legend says he was a giant, half man and half spirit, who protected the sacred places from those who would defile them. Guardian? Your people might call him a monster. We called him necessary. I looked around at the 12 dead men arranged in their spiral pattern. This is necessary? The Cherokee man, I still didn't know his name, nodded grimly. These men brought poison into sacred ground. They cut down century-old trees to make room for their operation. They dumped chemicals into streams where our ancestors prayed. They took something holy and made it filthy. So something killed them for it? Something protected what needed protecting. As he spoke, I became aware that we weren't alone. There was something else in the clearing with us, something large moving just outside the range of my vision. Every time I tried to look directly at it, it seemed to fade into the shadows between the trees. It's here, isn't it? I whispered. The Cherokee man smiled. It's always here. The question is whether you're ready to see it. What do you mean? Close your eyes, Ranger. Stop trying to understand with your head and start listening with your heart. I wanted to argue, to tell him that I was a man of facts and evidence, not superstition and old stories. But something in his voice made me trust him. I closed my eye. At first, all I heard was the wind in the trees and the distant sound of a creek running down the mountain. But gradually, I became aware of something else, a presence, ancient and patient, watching me from the shadows. I opened my eyes and saw it clearly for the first time. It stood about 20 feet away, between two large oak trees. 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its eyes glowed red like coals, and when it breathed, frost formed in the air despite the November temperature. But what struck me most was its intelligence. This wasn't a mindless beast. This was something that thought, planned, and judged. Something that had been making deliberate decisions about who lived and who died. We stared at each other for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then, without breaking eye contact, it raised one massive hand and pointed at me. It knows you, the Cherokee man said quietly. It's been watching you work, studying you. What does it want? To know whose side you're on. The creature, the guardian, the booger man, whatever it was, took a step closer. I could smell it now, like pine needles and rich earth and something wild that had never been tamed. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind through deep caves. You hunt them, it said, each word carefully formed. The ones who steal, who poison, who take what is not theirs. I realized it was talking about my job, my 12 years of busting illegal operations in the forest. That's right, I managed to say. I try to protect the forest. But you serve their laws, not the old laws, not the true laws. I didn't know how to respond to that. The creature was right. I served the state of Kentucky and the federal government, not some ancient system of justice that predated written history. The old laws are simpler, the Cherokee man said, as if reading my thoughts. Take only what you need. Give back more than you take. Respect the sacred places. Punish those who don't. The creature nodded slowly, never taking its red eyes off me. Choose, it said in its deep, hollow voice. Serve them, or serve the land. You cannot serve both. Then it turned and walked into the forest, moving through the trees like smoke despite its massive size. Within seconds, it had vanished completely, leaving only the smell of pine and earth behind. I stood there shaking, not from cold, but from the weight of what I'd just experienced. The Cherokee man put a hand on my shoulder. Think carefully, Ranger, he said. It's offered you something few outsiders ever get, a choice. But if you choose wrong, or if you try to play both sides, you'll end up like them. He gestured at the 12 dead men arranged in their spiral pattern. What's your name? I asked. Joseph Crow Feather. And you should know, I'm the one who's been calling in these sites, making sure you found them first, before the state police or the feds. Why? Because the Guardian wanted to see how you'd react, whether you'd try to hunt it down like some animal, or whether you'd try to understand. And Joseph smiled. You're still alive, aren't you? I looked around at the destroyed drug operation, the spiral of bodies, the ancient skull on its stone altar. Everything I'd been trained to do told me to call in backup, seal off the area, and start a manhunt for whoever was responsible for these deaths. But I knew now that there was no whoever. There was only something that had been here longer than human law, longer than human understanding. Something that operated by rules so old they'd been forgotten by everyone except a few Cherokee who still remembered the old stories. What happens now? I asked. Now you decide what kind of ranger you want to be, Joseph said. The kind who enforces laws written by men in distant cities, or the kind who protects what's truly sacred. I spent that night in my cabin, staring at the photos I'd taken of 7 destroyed sites and 24 dead men. By morning, I'd made my choice. I was going to learn the old laws. Joseph Crow Feather became my teacher over the next several months. He showed me how to read the forest differently, not just as a collection of trees and wildlife, but as a living system with its own intelligence and memory. He taught me which places were sacred, which plants and animals served as messengers, and how to recognize the signs that the guardian was near. Most importantly, he taught me how to distinguish between the mountain families who belonged to this land and the outsiders who only wanted to exploit it. Your guardian, I said one day as we walked through a grove of ancient hemlocks. Does it have a name? Many names, Joseph replied. The Cherokee called it Kekle Kudla, which means the one who watches. Your mountain families call it the Booger Man. But names aren't important. Understanding is. I think I'm starting to understand. It only kills outsiders, right? People who don't belong here. Joseph stopped walking and looked at me seriously. It kills those who take without permission, who violate sacred places for profit, who bring poison and greed to clean land. But I'm an outsider too. My family came from Scotland 3 generations ago. Your family came to work the land, not to steal from it. Your grandfather told you the old stories, even if you didn't believe them at first. And you've spent 12 years protecting this forest. That makes you more native than blood alone ever could. I was learning to think like the guardian, to see the forest through its ancient eyes. When I patrolled now, I looked for different things. Not just illegal activities, but violations of the old laws. People who cut down healthy trees for convenience. Hunters who killed more than they needed. Anyone who brought industrial-scale operations into sacred areas. The guardian seemed to approve of my new understanding. Sometimes when I was alone in the deep woods, I'd catch glimpses of it watching me from the shadows. Once, I found a deer that had been killed by poachers and left to rot. When I returned the next day with a cleanup crew, we found the poachers' camp destroyed and 2 men dead in the familiar circle pattern. But it was in March 1977 that everything came to a head. I got a call from dispatch about a massive federal operation moving into the northern section of the forest. DEA, FBI, ATF, a joint task force planning to establish a permanent surveillance base to monitor drug trafficking through the region. Where exactly are they setting up? I asked. Crying Woman Creek, the dispatcher said. They've got heavy equipment coming in, planning to clear about 10 acres for their compound. My blood went cold. Crying Woman Creek was one of the most sacred sites in the entire forest, a place where Cherokee women had once come to pray for their children's safety. Joseph had shown it to me just weeks before, explaining that it was under the Guardian's special protection. If the feds started cutting down centuries-old trees and building a military-style compound on sacred ground, the Guardian wouldn't just kill a few agents. It would start a war. I tried calling the task force commander, explaining that the area was environmentally sensitive, but he brushed me off. Federal jurisdiction trumped local rangers, he said. They'd be breaking ground the next morning. That night, I hiked up to Crying Woman Creek under a full moon. The Guardian was already there, standing in the center of the grove like a shadow-given form. Even from 50 yards away, I could feel its rage radiating like heat from a fire. They don't know what they're doing, I called out as I approached. They're not here to hurt the forest. They just don't understand. The guardian turned those red eyes on me. "Understanding is not required for judgment," it said in its hollow voice. "Only action. If you kill federal agents, they'll send the army. They'll turn this whole forest into a war zone. Let them come." I realized then that the guardian didn't care about consequences the way humans did. It was a force of nature, like an earthquake or a hurricane. It would do what it was created to do, regardless of the aftermath. "There has to be another way," I said. The guardian tilted its massive head, studying me. "You serve their laws now, or the old laws. Choose." This was it, the moment Joseph had warned me about. I could report the guardian's location to the federal task force, help them hunt it down with helicopters and sniper rifles. I could fulfill my duty as a sworn law enforcement officer, or I could betray everything I'd been trained to believe was right. "I choose the land," I said. The guardian nodded slowly. "Then stop them." "How?" "However you must." I spent the rest of that night making phone calls. I called environmental groups and told them about rare species in the Crying Woman Creek area that would be endangered by construction. I called archaeological societies and claimed there were Cherokee burial sites that needed protection. I called local politicians and reminded them that tourism dollars depended on keeping the forest pristine. By morning, I had 3 different federal judges issuing temporary restraining orders and a small army of protesters heading for the construction site. The task force commander was furious when he called me. "This is obstruction of justice, Ranger," he said. "We know you're behind this." "I'm just doing my job," I replied, "protecting the forest." "Your job is to cooperate with federal law enforcement. My job is to serve the land and the people who belong to it." The legal battles lasted for months. Environmental lawyers fought government lawyers while protesters camped in the trees, and news crews filmed everything. Eventually, the feds found another location for their base, 20 miles away, in an area that had already been logged and replanted. Crying Woman Creek remained untouched. Joseph found me there on the day the last of the Appalachian. Protesters packed up and left. "You chose well," he said. "The guardian is pleased." "Is it over?" "It's never over. But you understand now. You're not just a ranger anymore. You're a guardian too." As if summoned by his words, the creature emerged from the shadows between the trees. But this time it didn't feel threatening. It felt respectful. "Brother," it said to me in its deep voice, and somehow I knew that was the highest honor it could bestow. From that day forward, my relationship with the Daniel Boone Forest changed completely. I was still a ranger, still enforced the law when necessary. But I also enforced the older, deeper laws that govern the relationship between humans and the wild places they inhabit. The guardian and I became partners in a way that no government manual could have prepared me for. It would show me violations of the sacred places, and I would find legal ways to stop them. When legal methods weren't enough, well, sometimes poachers and polluters just disappeared into the deep woods, never to be seen again. That was almost 50 years ago now. I'm retired from the ranger service, but I still live in the same cabin, still walk the same trails. The forest has changed some. More visitors, more development pressure, more people who see trees as lumber and streams as waste disposal. But the guardian is still here, still watching, still protecting. I've trained 3 younger rangers in the old ways over the years. Not all of them could handle it. One requested a transfer after his first encounter with the guardian, and another tried to report what he'd seen to the authorities. That one ended up quitting the service entirely after a series of accidents that convinced him the forest didn't want him there. But the third one, a young woman named Sarah Whitehorse, whose grandmother was Cherokee, understood immediately. She's taken over most of my duties now, working with Joseph's nephew to maintain the balance between human law and natural law. The official records show that illegal activities in the Daniel Boone Forest have dropped by over 80% since 1976. Environmental groups praise our conservation efforts. Tourists come from all over the world to experience one of the last truly wild places in Kentucky. What they don't know is that the forest is wild by choice, not accident. That it's protected by something older and more powerful than any human law. That there are still places in this world where the old rules apply, where taking without permission carries consequences that modern people can barely imagine. Sometimes, late at night when the moon is dark and the wind is still, I walk the trails and feel the guardian's presence moving through the trees beside me. We don't talk much anymore. After all these years, we understand each other without words. But occasionally, when we come across some sign of new threats to the forest, surveyors' stakes driven into sacred ground, or chemical residue in a pristine stream, it will turn those ancient red eyes on me and speak a single word: choose. And I always give the same answer: the land. Because some things are more important than human law. Some places deserve protection regardless of what any government thinks is legal or profitable. And some guardians, whether they have badges or fur, whether they serve in courtrooms or deep woods, understand that their highest duty is not to the authorities who appointed them, but to the sacred places they've sworn to protect. The Booger Man is still out there in the Daniel Boone forest, still watching, still waiting, still guarding what needs to be guarded. And as long as people remember the old stories, as long as someone keeps faith with the ancient laws, it always will be. Just remember, if you ever find yourself deep in those Kentucky mountains with ideas about quick money and easy profits, the forest is watching, the land remembers, and some violations of the sacred carry consequences that no court of law could ever impose. Choose wisely. Author's note: this account is based on the personal testimony of Samuel Blackthorne, recorded in 1995, shortly before his death. The Daniel Boone National Forest Service declined to comment on Ranger Blackthorne's claims, stating only that he was a dedicated officer who served with distinction for over 30 years. Illegal activity in the forest has indeed declined dramatically since the 1970s, though official explanations cite improved surveillance and enforcement rather than supernatural intervention. Readers are encouraged to draw their own conclusions. My name is Margaret Thornfield, and I've been a park ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 14 years. Half Cherokee, half English, I grew up hearing my grandmother's stories about the old spirits that lived in these mountains. I never believed them. Not until last winter, when I learned some things are real, whether you believe in them or not. The Blue Ridge Parkway stretches 469 miles through Virginia and North Carolina, but my section covers the most remote part, 30 miles of winding mountain road where cell phones don't work and the nearest town is an hour away. I prefer it that way. Always have. Out here, it's just me, the mountains, and whatever wildlife decides to show itself. I know every trail, every overlook, every hidden creek in my territory. In 14 years, I've hiked over 10,000 miles of these ridges. I can read weather patterns 3 days out just by watching how the ravens fly. I can track a black bear through snow that would fool most hunters. These mountains are in my blood. But that December morning when I found the first report on my desk, something felt different. The air itself seemed heavy, like the mountains were holding their breath. Ranger Thornfield, the typed report began. My family and I were hiking the Rough Ridge Trail on December 10th when we got lost in heavy fog. We were scared and cold, maybe 15 minutes from panic, when this old Cherokee man appeared out of nowhere. He knew exactly where we were and gave us perfect directions back to the parking area. We tried to thank him, but when we turned around to wave goodbye, he was gone. Completely gone, like he just vanished into thin air. I set the report down and rubbed my temples. Lost hikers seeing things. It happened more than people realized. Stress, cold, exhaustion. The mind played tricks. But then I found the other reports. 5 more families over the past month. All lost. All helped by the same old Cherokee man who disappeared before they could properly thank him. Same description every time. Gray hair in traditional braids, old-fashioned clothes that looked handmade, eyes that seemed to see everything. And always, he vanished. I pulled the older files from storage going back years. The pattern was there, buried in decades of paperwork. 1995. Elderly Native American man helps lost family. Disappears. 1987. Mysterious, helpful stranger guides injured hiker to safety, vanishes when help arrives. 1978. Old Cherokee man provides shelter directions during blizzard, nowhere to be found afterward. The descriptions never changed. Not in 40 years. I stacked the reports on my desk and stared out the window at the snow-covered ridges. My grandmother used to tell stories about the Nunahai, the immortal ones who chose to become spirits rather than leave their homeland during the Trail of Tears. "They're still out there, Maggie," she'd whisper when I was small. "Still taking care of people who need help." I'd always thought they were just stories. The radio crackled to life, making me jump. "Base to Ranger Thornfield." "Go ahead, dispatch." "We've got a report of 2 missing hikers on the Tanawa Trail. Last seen around 2 p.m. yesterday. Weather's moving in fast." I looked outside. The sky was turning that particular shade of gray that meant serious snow was coming. In these mountains, serious snow could kill you. "Copy that, I'm heading out now." I grabbed my gear and headed for the door, but something made me pause. On impulse, I pulled out my grandmother's old journal from my desk drawer. She'd filled it with Cherokee stories and old maps of the mountains from before the parkway was built. I'd never paid much attention to it before. Today felt different. I slipped the journal into my pack alongside my radio, GPS, and emergency supply. Outside, the first fat snowflakes were starting to fall. The Tanawa Trail winds along some of the most beautiful and dangerous ridgeline in the Blue Ridge. In good weather, it offers views that stretch for 50 miles. In bad weather, it becomes a death trap of hidden cliffs and sudden drop-offs. I'd been searching for 3 hours when the snow really started coming down. Not the gentle Christmas card kind of snow. This was serious mountain weather, the kind that could dump 2 feet in as many hours and turn familiar trails into alien landscapes. My radio crackled with static. "Ranger Thornfield, what's your status?" I tried to respond, but got nothing but white noise. The mountains did that sometimes, especially during storms. I was on my own. The missing hikers were college kids from Charlotte, experienced enough to know better but young enough to think they were invincible. Their car was still in the parking area, covered now with 4 inches of snow. Their footprints led up the trail, but after a quarter mile, the fresh snow had covered everything. I stopped at Rough Ridge Overlook and cupped my hands around my mouth. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" My voice echoed off the rocks and disappeared into the swirling snow. Nothing. I was about to continue up the trail when I noticed something odd. There, in the fresh snow beside the trail, was a single set of footprints. Not hiking boots like the missing college kids would wear, but something else. Something that looked almost like moccasins. The prints were clear and sharp, which meant they were recent. Very recent. But who would be out here in moccasins during a blizzard? I followed the prints for about 50 yards before they simply stopped. Not at a rock or a tree or any place where someone might have stepped to avoid leaving tracks. They just ended in the middle of the trail, as if whoever made them had vanished into thin air. The snow was falling harder now, and visibility was dropping fast. I needed to find those hikers before hypothermia set in. I pushed deeper into the storm, following the ridge-line and calling out every few minutes. That's when I heard it. A voice, faint but clear, calling back to me from somewhere ahead. I couldn't make out words, but it sounded like someone in distress. I picked up my pace, fighting through snow that was now ankle-deep and getting deeper by the minute. "Keep calling," I shouted. "I'm coming." I followed the voice for another 10 minutes, climbing over fallen logs and around ice-covered boulders. The storm was getting worse, and I was starting to worry about my own safety when I finally saw them. 2 figures huddled against a large rock outcropping, waving frantically. The college kids. They were alive, but I could see from their posture that they were in bad shape. "Thank God," the young man gasped as I approached. "We've been stuck here for hours. We tried to find our way back, but everything looks the same in the snow." "Are either of you injured?" I asked, already pulling emergency blankets from my pack. "No, just cold," the girl replied, her teeth chattering. "Really, really cold." I wrapped them in the thermal blankets and handed out heat packs. "How did you end up here? This isn't anywhere near the main trail." They exchanged a look. That's the weird part, the young man said. We were completely lost, probably walking in circles for an hour. Then this old Cherokee man appeared and told us to wait here, that help was coming soon. My blood went cold. What old man? He was right here just a few minutes ago, the girl said, looking around confused. He said a ranger was looking for us and would find us if we stayed put. How did he know that? I scanned the area. There were our footprints in the snow and the depression where they'd been sitting, but no other tracks, no sign that anyone else had been here. Which direction did he go? I asked. They both pointed toward the ridge line. I looked, but saw only swirlies, snow and bare trees. He knew your name, the girl added quietly. He said Ranger Thornfield would find us soon, and that we should trust you completely. I felt something cold crawl up. My spine that had nothing to do with the weather. I'd never met these kids before in my life, and I hadn't told anyone my name over the radio. There'd been too much static. Let's get you two out of here, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. Can you walk? They nodded, and I led them back toward the parking area, following my own tracks in the snow. But I kept thinking about those moccasin prints that had just stopped. About the old man who had known my name and vanished without leaving a trace. About my grandmother's stories of the Nunahai. The hike back took an hour through deepening snow. I got the college kids to their car, warmed up and safe, and watched them drive away. But as I walked back to my truck, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. There, beside my vehicle, were fresh tracks in the snow, the same moccasin prints I'd seen on the trail. They circled my truck once, then headed off into the woods. But what scared me most was what I found on my windshield. A small bundle of sage and sweetgrass tied with a leather cord in the traditional Cherokee way, still warm despite the freezing snow. I looked around, but the forest was empty except for the falling snow. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" Only the wind answered. I picked up the bundle with trembling hands. It smelled like my grandmother's house, like cedar smoke and old stories, like things I'd tried to forget. As I drove home through the storm, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the trees. Something that had been waiting for me to finally notice it. Something that knew my name. The reports started coming in every few days after that. Always the same story. Hikers in trouble. Mysterious Cherokee man appears to help, vanishes before anyone can thank him properly. But now I was paying attention to details I'd missed before. The helper always appeared, at the exact moment people needed him most. Never before, never after. And he always knew exactly what to say, exactly where to send them, like he could see the whole mountain at once. I started carrying my grandmother's journal with me on every patrol. Late at night in my cabin, I'd study her old maps and stories by lamplight. She'd marked specific locations throughout the mountains with Cherokee symbols I was only beginning to understand. Sacred places, spirit crossings, places where the world grew thin. 3 weeks after the blizzard incident, I got a call that changed everything. "Ranger Thornfield, we've got a situation on the Lynn Cove Viaduct. Family of 4 went for a hike yesterday and never came back. Their car's been there overnight." The Lynn Cove Viaduct is one of the most photographed spots on the whole parkway, a curved bridge that seems to float through the forest canopy. It's also surrounded by some of the most treacherous terrain in the Blue Ridge, full of hidden cliffs and steep ravines. I found their car in the visitor center parking lot, covered with frost. Inside was a note on the dashboard. "Hiking the Tanahua Trail to Rough Ridge, back by sunset. The Hendersons." They'd been gone for 18 hours. I geared up and headed out, but this time I packed my grandmother's journal and something else, a small pouch of tobacco and sage that I'd found in her things after she died. I wasn't sure why, but it felt important. The trail was different that morning. Not just empty I was used to. This felt watching. Every bird call seemed too sharp, every rustle in the underbrush too deliberate. The mountains themselves felt alert, aware. I was maybe a mile up the trail when I found the first clue. A child's mitten, bright red against the brown leaves. Then 50 yards further, a water bottle. They were leaving a trail, but it was heading away from the mine and path deeper into the wilderness. I followed the scattered items for another half hour, climbing steadily into terrain that most-day hikers wouldn't attempt. The forest grew denser, older. These were trees that had been here before the parkway, before the settlers, maybe before the Cherokee themselves. That's when I heard the crying. Faint at first, but definitely a child. I called out and heard an answering shout. Adult voices, desperate and frightened. I crashed through the underbrush toward the sound and found them in a small clearing surrounded by massive old-growth oaks. The Henderson family, 2 parents and twin 8-year-old boys. They were huddled together in the center of the clearing, and they looked terrified. "Thank God," Mrs. Henderson gasped when she saw me. "We've been lost since yesterday. We kept trying to find our way back, but we just kept going in circles." I looked around the clearing. It was perfectly round, maybe 30 feet across, with those ancient oaks forming an almost complete circle around the edge. In the exact center was a ring of stones that looked old, very old. "How did you end up here?" I asked, pulling out my GPS. The screen showed nothing but static. "We were following the trail markers," Mr. Henderson said, "but somehow we took a wrong turn and ended up here. Every time we try to leave, we just end up back here." One of the boys tugged on my sleeve. "The old man said you'd come." I felt that familiar chill. "What old man?" "He was here this morning," the other twin said. "He brought us water and told us to wait right here in the circle. He said Ranger Thornfield would find us today." I looked at the parents. Mrs. Henderson nodded. "We saw him too. Elderly Cherokee gentleman, traditional clothes. He said he'd been watching over lost travelers in these mountains for a very long time." "Where did he go?" They all pointed toward the same gap between 2 of the massive oaks. I walked over and looked, but saw only dense forest stretching away into shadows. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign anyone had passed to Hat Way. But there was something else. Carved into the bark of the largest oak, so old it was almost grown over, were Cherokee symbols that matched ones in my grandmother's journal. I traced them with my finger, and for just a moment I could have sworn I felt them pulse with warmth. "Everyone stay in the center of the clearing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm going to figure out how to get us out of here." I pulled out my compass, but the needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. My GPS was still showing nothing but static. Even my radio was dead. Not just poor reception, but completely silent. We were cut off from the outside world. I opened my grandmother's journal and found the page with the Cherokee symbols from the tree. Beside them, she'd written in her careful handwriting, "Sanctuary Circle." The Nunahai used these places to help lost souls find their way. But the living must be invited to leave. Invited to leave. By who? I looked around the clearing again, and this time I noticed something I'd missed before. At the base of each oak tree was a small pile of stones, arranged in careful patterns, and scattered around the edges of the clearing were objects that didn't belong. A hiking boot from maybe the 1980s, a faded baseball cap, a water bottle so old the label had completely worn away. Other lost travelers. How many people had found this place over the years? "Everyone hold hands," I said suddenly. "Form a circle around these stones in the center." "Why?" Mr. Henderson asked. "Because I think this place has rules," I said, "and I think someone's been trying to teach them to me." We formed our circle, the family's hands cold but trusting in mine. I closed my eyes and tried to remember everything my grandmother had told me about the old ways, about respect and reciprocity and asking permission. "We're grateful for the sanctuary," I said aloud, feeling foolish but somehow knowing it was right. "We're grateful for the protection, but we need to go home now. We have families waiting for us." The wind through the trees stopped. The clearing fell completely silent. Then, from somewhere just outside the circle of oaks, I heard a voice, old, gentle, speaking in Cherokee words I somehow understood despite never learning the language. "You remember," the voice said. "Good. Take them home, granddaughter. But remember, some are meant to walk between worlds." A path opened up between two trees that I could have sworn had no gap between them moments before, clear and obvious, leading back toward the main trail. "Follow me," I said, and led the Henderson family out of the clearing. We found the Tanawa Trail in 15 minutes. My GPS started working again. My radio crackled back to life. But when I looked back, the gap between the trees was gone. Just solid forest, as if there had never been a path there at all. The Hendersons made it back to their car safely. I filed my report, leaving out the parts about mysterious voices and vanishing paths. But that night, I sat in my cabin with my grandmother's journal open on my kitchen table, finally understanding that everything she'd told me was true. The Nunahai were real. They were still here, still helping people who got lost in their mountains. And for some reason, they wanted me to know about it. The next 3 months changed everything I thought I knew about the Blue Ridge Mountains. The encounters came more frequently, and I started to realize they weren't random. The Nunahi were showing themselves to me deliberately, teaching me things I needed to understand. I learned to recognize the signs, the way the air shimmered just before they appeared, the sudden silence of birds and insects, the feeling of being gently watched. I started leaving small offerings at the sacred sites my grandmother had marked in her journal: tobacco, sage, sometimes just a few words of gratitude spoken aloud, and they began to trust me. The first time I actually saw one clearly was in April, during a routine patrol of the craggy Pinnacle area. I was checking on a group of college students who'd been camping without permits when I noticed one of them wandering away from the others, heading toward a cliff edge in the fog. I started to call out a warning, but before I could, a figure stepped out from behind a tree directly in the student's path. An elderly Cherokee man in traditional clothes, just like all the witnesses had described. He spoke quietly to the young man, who nodded and turned back toward his campsite, seemingly unaware of how close he'd come to walking off a 300-foot drop. The old man looked at me across the clearing and smiled. Then he simply faded away, like mist in sunlight. That night, I found a gift on my cabin doorstep, a small, carved stone bear, warm to the touch despite the cool evening air. But it was in May that I learned what the Nunahai really wanted from me. I was investigating reports of illegal dumping in a remote watershed when I found something that made my blood boil. Someone had been using a hidden valley as a private landfill. Dozens of chemical drums and construction debris dumped directly into a stream that fed into the main watershed. The pollution was already spreading, killing fish and poisoning the water that thousands of people depended on. I was photographing the evidence when I felt that familiar shimmer in the air. This time, 3 figures materialized around me. The elderly man I'd seen before, a middle-aged Cherokee woman, and someone who looked barely older than a teenager but with eyes that seemed ancient. "You see," the old man said, speaking English now with an accent that sounded like my grandmother's. "They poison the waters. They poison the land. This has been going on for months." "I'll report this," I said. "Get the EPA involved. Track down whoever's responsible." The woman shook, her head sadly. "By the time your agencies act, the damage will be done, and the ones responsible will disappear, like they always do." "Then what do you want me to do?" The youngest-looking one stepped forward. "What your grandmother would have done. What you were born to do. Walk between worlds. Speak for those who have no voice." I felt something change inside me at those words, like a door opening that had been locked my whole life. "How?" The old man smiled and handed me something, a small leather pouch that felt warm and alive in my hands. The old ways and the new ways, working together. "You know what to do, granddaughter. You've always known." When I looked up, they were gone. But I understood. That night, I made a choice that would have gotten me fired if anyone had found out. Instead of filing an official report and waiting for the bureaucratic wheels to turn, I called in an anonymous tip to every environmental group, news outlet, and government agency I could think of. I sent them detailed photos, GPS coordinates, and water sample results from my personal testing kit. But I also did something else. I performed a ceremony my grandmother had taught me years ago, one I'd never really believed in until now. I spoke to the land itself, to the spirits who had been guardians of these mountains for generations, and asked for their help in protecting what was sacred. The response was swift and decisive. Within 48 hours, the illegal dump site was swarming with EPA investigators, state environmental officials, and news crews. The pollution was contained, the responsible parties were identified and arrested, and the cleanup began immediately. But that wasn't what convinced me the Nunahai had been involved. What convinced me was the fact that the investigation moved faster than any environmental case I'd ever heard of. Bureaucratic delays that should have taken months happened in days. Key evidence appeared in exactly the right hands at exactly the right moments. Witnesses came forward who had been silent for years. It was as if the universe itself was conspiring to see justice done. 2 weeks later, I found another gift on my doorstep. A small piece of perfectly clean quartz crystal and a note written in Cherokee symbols that I somehow knew meant well done. But the real revelation came that June, during the worst crisis of my career, a massive wildfire had broken out in the most remote section of my territory, spreading fast through drought-dry forest toward several sacred sites marked in my grandmother's journal. The fire crews were struggling to contain it, and the forecast called for high winds that could turn the controlled burn into a catastrophe. I was coordinating evacuation efforts when I felt the familiar shimmer in the air. This time, dozens of figures appeared around me, more Nunahai than I'd ever seen at once. Men, women, children, all in traditional dress, all looking at me with expressions of urgent concern. "The fire will reach the sacred grove by morning," the old man said, "the place where our ancestors chose to become spirits rather than leave their homeland. If it burns—" He didn't finish, but I understood. Some things were too important to lose. "What can I do?" I asked. "I'm just one person." The Cherokee woman from before stepped forward. "You're not just one person. You're a bridge between worlds. You have access to both the old knowledge and the new tools. Use them both." What happened next still gives me chills when I think about it. Following instructions that came to me like half-remembered dreams, I used my Park Service radio to coordinate with the fire crews, but I also used knowledge that came from somewhere much older. I knew exactly which ridge lines the fire would follow, which wind patterns would develop, which natural fire breaks could be strengthened to contain the blaze. I guided the fire crews to strategic positions that made no sense according to their computer models, but worked perfectly in practice. I suggested water drops in locations that seemed random but turned out to be crucial. And somehow, working together, the living and the spirits, modern, technology and ancient wisdom, we saved the sacred grove. The fire was contained just 50 yards from the ancient trees where the Nunahai had chosen to make their eternal home. That night, as I sat exhausted by my campfire, the old man appeared one last time. "You understand now," he said. "You are the bridge we've been waiting for, the one who can help us protect what matters most." "Why me?" I asked. He smiled. "Because you have one foot in each world, granddaughter. Cherokee blood and Park Service training, ancient wisdom and modern tools. You can speak to both sides and make them understand each other. What happens now? Now you do what you were born to do. You walk between worlds. You protect the sacred places and the people who need help finding their way. And when the time comes, you teach others to do the same." He began to fade away, but his final words came clearly. "The mountains have been waiting for you, Margaret Thornfield. Welcome home." That was 3 years ago. Since then, my life has changed in ways I never could have imagined. Officially, I'm still just a park ranger with an unusual talent for finding lost hikers and preventing environmental disasters. My success rate is so high that other rangers sometimes joke about my supernatural intuition if they only knew how right they were. Unofficially, I've become something much more important, a liaison between the world of the living and the world of the spirits. The Nunahai appear to me regularly now, not as mysterious figures glimpsed in fog, but as trusted partners in protecting the Blue Ridge Mountains. They've taught me to see the forest as they do, not just as trees and rocks and wildlife, but as a living system where everything is connected. They've shown me sacred sites that don't appear on any modern map, told me stories that help me understand how the land itself thinks and feels, and in rituals. In turn, I use my position and training to protect what they hold sacred. The illegal dumping was just the beginning. Over the past 3 years, I've stopped 2 major development projects that would have destroyed important spiritual sites, prevented a mining operation from contaminating a watershed that feeds 3 counties, and quietly redirected several highway expansion projects away from Cherokee burial grounds. Each time I work within the system, filing reports, organizing inspections, coordinating with other agencies. But I also have guidance that no other ranger has access to. The Nunahai can see the long-term consequences of human actions in ways that our environmental impact studies never capture. It's not always easy. There are times when my supernatural sources of information conflict with official Park Service policy. Times when I have to choose between following regulations and protecting something irreplaceable. But I've learned to trust the wisdom of beings who have been guardians of these mountains for over a century and a half. They've never steered me wrong. The hardest part has been the isolation. I can't exactly put consultation with immortal Cherokee spirits in my incident reports. Most of my colleagues think I'm just unusually dedicated and maybe a little eccentric. My family worries that I spend too much time alone in the mountains. They don't understand that I'm never really alone anymore. Last month, I started training 2 other Cherokee Rangers who work in different sections of the parkway. Both of them had been having their own encounters with the Nunahai, but were afraid to talk about it. Now we meet once a month to share information and coordinate our efforts to protect the sacred sites throughout the Blue Ridge. The Nunahai are pleased with this development. They've told me that their influence extends far beyond my section of the parkways. And they need more living allies who can work within modern institutions while respecting the old ways. I've also started keeping more detailed records of everything I've learned, following my grandmother's example. Someday, when I'm ready to retire, I'll need to pass this knowledge on to the next generation. The mountains will always need guardians who can walk between worlds. But for now, I'm content to do my job, both the official one and the unofficial one. Every morning when I drive out to start my patrol, I feel the presence of the Nunahai around me, ancient protectors who have chosen to trust me with their secrets. The Blue Ridge Mountains are more alive than most people realize, full of mysteries and magic that exists alongside the hiking trails and scenic overlooks. Most visitors will never see beyond the surface beauty, but sometimes when someone really needs help, when they're truly lost and frightened and alone, they might encounter an elderly Cherokee man who appears just when hope is running out. He'll give them exactly the guidance they need, and then he'll vanish before they can properly thank him. If that ever happens to you, don't try to explain it away. Don't convince yourself it was just your imagination or stress-induced hallucination. Accept the help with gratitude. Say thank you to the empty forest. And remember that some things are more real than real, more true than facts. The Nunahai are still here, still taking care of people who need them. They've been doing it for over 150 years, and they'll keep doing it long after I'm gone. Because some promises are stronger than death, and some guardians never abandon their posts. The mountains remember everything. And sometimes, if you're very lucky or very lost, they'll remember to help you too. My name is Margaret Thornfield, and I walk between worlds. It's the best job I've ever had.